Hey there. If you're new, welcome to the channel. If you're a regular, welcome back. Where are you listening from, and what time is it for you? Let me know in the comments. Now, sit back, relax, and let the stories begin. Kelly Bergdove, a 20-year-old mother, lived in Bridgewater, Virginia with her 4-year-old daughter. She was well-loved and admired by everyone who knew her, with not a single person in the town having a bad word to say about her. Her loving husband, with whom she'd been romantically involved since their high school sophomore year, cherished her deeply. Kelly also maintained close relationships with her mother and sisters, staying in touch almost daily. She was the picture of wholesomeness, even balancing a night shift at a local gas station to support her family. While they were financially stable, Kelly appreciated the value of contributing and wanted to provide her family with a taste of the finer things in life, while also saving for her daughter's future college expenses. Yet, sometimes the most wonderful people are the ones who experience the worst tragedies. On the night of June 18, 1982, something terrible was about to unfold in the small town of Bridgewater, Virginia, sending shockwaves through the tight-knit community. Kelly was working her regular night shift at Harrisonburg's Imperial gas station on South Main Street, Route 11. She had gotten the job through her 3 sisters, who had either worked there previously or were still employed by Imperial. The employer believed this familial bond would keep the girls accountable, and he was right. If one couldn't make it to work, another would always step in to help. On this particular night, Kelly was covering a shift for one of her sisters, earning some extra money for her daughter's college fund. Kelly's mother, Rachel, was a devoted and caring woman who frequently called the gas station to check if any of her daughters needed food or coffee to get through their shifts. When Rachel spoke to Kelly that night, everything seemed normal. It was just another quiet evening at a gas station in rural Virginia. Little did Rachel know, it would be the last time she'd speak to her daughter. Around 2:30 a.m., after Rachel had gone to bed, Kelly made a call to the Harrisonburg police. She reported that she had been harassed by a man she described as improperly dressed. Kelly, being polite, didn't provide the details of what had occurred, but it was clear from her tone that the man had exposed himself to her. Just minutes after this initial call, Kelly called again, this time asking for a patrol unit to be sent to the gas station. The same man was now calling the station, making obscene threats, and Kelly was becoming increasingly anxious, fearing that he might act on them. The dispatcher assured her that a unit would be sent right away and that she should stay put. But just moments after the second call ended, Kelly called 911 once more. This time, she was in a complete panic. With a voice that was dripping with fear, she demanded to know how far away the responding police officers were, as the same deranged customer had apparently returned and was sitting in a silver or gray Ford that was parked in the gas station's forecourt. The last thing the 911 dispatcher heard was Kelly screaming that the man had just gotten out of the vehicle and was heading towards the gas station's main building. She then slammed the phone down, apparently preparing to defend herself. The cops rushed over to the Imperial gas station expecting to arrive to a violent assault in progress. But to their bemusement, when they arrived at the gas station, the place was as quiet as the grave. They searched the entire site, but Kelly was nowhere to be found. All that remained was her purse. There were no signs of any kind of violent struggle, no indications the store had been robbed. But there were also no clues as to where Kelly was. It was as if she simply vanished into thin air. What's clear is that if the suspect was armed, he could have forced Kelly into his vehicle in just a matter of seconds. Kelly's family believe this to be the case, as they insist that any attempt by an unarmed man to grab her and shove her into their vehicle would have resulted in Kelly fighting back vigorously. The police investigation that followed led officers to a nearby convenience store where a clerk informed them that he had been visited by a man driving a gray vehicle about a half an hour before Kelly's disappearance. The clerk told them that the man was aged between 20 to 25 years old and had blonde shoulder-length hair. This might seem like an obvious lead, but the cops were unable to track down this man, so no connection between him and Kelly's apparent abduction could ever be made. The police then interviewed Kelly's 3 sisters, who were also employed by the gas station. They were shocked to hear that the obscene kind of phone calls that Kelly had received that night were commonplace. but that no one had ever acted on them, believing them to be from some harmless old pervert whose bark was louder than his bite. They also didn't entirely believe that the man that had harassed Kelly that night was the same person making the phone calls, as there didn't seem to be anything overly threatening about the lewd calls. While the driver of the silver or gray Ford was obviously aggressive enough to show up to the gas station in person. Yet after news hit that one of the gas station girls had apparently been abducted, the phone calls seemed to stop entirely for a while, only resuming around 6 weeks later when this apparently harmless old perv called and made lewd comments to one of the gas station's new hires. This could well be because whoever was making the calls simply wasn't involved in the abduction and didn't want to implicate themselves as a suspect in such a violent and disturbing crime. But it could also be because the same person who made the calls was satisfied with abducting Kelly and didn't feel the need to make another call, not until the same hunger resurfaced in them around a month and a half after the fact. When local media outlets contacted Kelly's parents regarding their daughter's disappearance, they gave a rather shocking answer to some very probing questions. When asked if they had any idea who might have kidnapped or harmed their daughter, and if this person might be a member of the local community, Kelly's parents unequivocally answered in the affirmative. Although the police had asked them not to publicly speak the man's name, they believed her abductor had been someone Kelly had gone to high school with, someone who had a long history of indecent exposure and making obscene telephone calls, and according to Kelly's sister, also drove a silvery gray Ford. But surely if Kelly had known the man personally, even just by association, she would have named him in one of the 3911 calls she made leading up to her abduction. But it's also very possible that this person had either obscured their face somehow or Kelly had simply not recognized him given that they had both graduated some time ago. There's also the possibility that Kelly was so terrified that she just failed to mention the man by name during one of those calls. Either way, the police obviously found the possibility of this man being the culprit so plausible that they asked Kelly's parents not to use his name publicly. Yet despite this, he was never charged with any crime as there was simply not enough evidence to attempt any kind of conviction. There were several other suspects in the case and authorities were sure to question all of them. But at a time when CCTV cameras and DNA evidence were still just technological pipe dreams, actually placing a suspect at the scene that night was all but impossible. For all intents and purposes, the person who showed up at the Imperial gas station that night is a ghost. Someone who showed up, bundled Kelly Berg Dove into a vehicle, and then seemingly vanished themselves. Barely a trace of either of them was left behind. Merely a purse and a vehicle description. Far too little for the cops to go on to secure a suspect. Kelly or her body. Almost 40 years later, what happened that night remains almost a total mystery, with Kelly being declared legally deceased by local authorities. Despite her family pouring money into private investigators to try and find out exactly what happened, they are no closer to getting any solid answers as they were almost 4 decades ago. The only truth we have of that night is the terrifying reality that Kelly went to work that night, not suspecting a thing, and ended up encountering someone that caused her to vanish from the face of the earth. And that, horrifyingly enough, is something that could happen to each and every one of us. My father passed away in 2008, just after I graduated high school, and we were left drowning in debt. I'm still struggling financially, but that's a story for another time. To continue my education, I had to find a job. For 3 years, I sold picautos on the street and taught math to young children. In December of 2012, I was hired by an ISP in our small town to work the night shift. During the interview, I was specifically asked if I would feel comfortable working alone on the 3rd floor of this huge building, with only one security guard on the ground floor. I wasn't thrilled about the idea, but I needed the job. Plus, with the night shift, I could still attend college during the day, which was a big plus. So, I worked in that office for a year, from February 2012 to February 2013, and during that time, I never really questioned why no one else was willing to take the night shift. I had heard that someone used to work nights before me, but he left abruptly. My job involved answering calls from clients with internet issues and providing basic solutions. If anything was too complicated, I'd take down their details and email them to my supervisor, and the technicians would handle it the next day. It was a simple job and the calls were few, so by 11 p.m., I would spread out a thick blanket on the floor and fall asleep with the receivers next to my head, just in case someone called. But in June 2013, I found out why no one else was willing to work nights. That night, the security guard, who I had become good friends with, came up to the third floor and asked if he could sleep in my room because there were too many mosquitoes on the ground floor. I knew he was supposed to stay awake, but he would often take advantage of my elevated position and sleep in my room. The building didn't have any security cameras, so no one ever noticed. So we both ended up sleeping in the same room. The two receivers were placed by my head, and the lights were turned off. I had loosely locked the door, leaving the corridor light on. At 3 a.m., I woke to a strange sound, like someone dragging their feet across the floor. It was very loud and unsettling. I was facing the door and could see the light shining through the small gap between the floor and the door. I stayed still, staring at the gap, trying to figure out what or who it could be. The sound got louder and louder, and soon, I saw feet crossing in front of my door. My heart started racing, but I thought it was just the security guard. However, when I turned to look behind me, he was sound asleep. A cold chill ran through me. The dragging sound continued, growing louder, and soon, I saw the feet again, now stopping right in front of my door. They didn't move. I waited, hoping whoever it was would leave, but they just stood there. And then, in a moment of panic, I made a terrible decision. I thought it might be an intruder, so instead of waking up the security guard, I crept over to the door and, with the thing still standing there, I suddenly pulled it open. There was no one there. Just a gust of wind hit my face, making my skin crawl with goosebumps. I immediately woke up the security guard and told him everything. He grabbed his flashlight, turned on all the lights, and searched the entire building, but there was no sign of anyone. Finally, he came back to me and, with a serious look, suggested it could have been a demon. After that, I couldn't sleep at all. I sent messages to the people who worked during the day, letting them know what had happened, and I made sure to get to the office a bit early the next day so I could talk to them in person. That's when the stories started to come out. One person mentioned having worked the night shift a few times, and he would always hear someone walking up and down the stairs in the middle of the night. Another person shared that they'd seen a chair moving on its own across the terrace, from one corner to another, with no one around. That's when I learned why no one wanted to take the night shifts and why people had been avoiding them for over a year. In August 2014, I left the company after they gave me a measly $3 raise, despite me having worked there for over a year. They paid me $54 a month, and yes, I know the salary is scarier than the story, but I had to stick with it to finish my bachelor's degree. I'd go to college in the morning, teach in the afternoon, and work at the office at night. The cost of education and just surviving pushed me deeper into debt, and I'm still not fully recovered. These days, they've installed cameras in the office, and sometimes I wonder if they've captured anything strange on them. I've also been planning to share my personal paranormal experiences, including this one, on my new channel called Many Realities, where I post strange but real stories from people all over the world that defy explanation. If you're interested, I'd love for you to check it out. But that's my story, and man, it was weird. To start, a bit of background. I'm a guy who lives in a decent neighborhood. It's your typical suburban area, small town vibe, plenty of people around. I'm a college student, home for break while my parents are away, which isn't helping much. I also live in a 2-story house, and I don't own any weapons, not even a gun, just some kitchen knives. I'm not on any medication, and there's no history of mental illness or schizophrenia in my family. I don't have close ties with my neighbors, most of whom are elderly, and the few others I do know I barely interact with. No one around me has any apparent reason to harm me. So, let's get into the strange happenings. About 2 nights ago, I woke up in the middle of the night and decided to use the bathroom. My 2nd-story bathroom has a window that overlooks the backyard, and just behind that, there's a cul-de-sac. There's a cluster of trees and a pile of rocks and mulch that separate it. Usually, I can make out the backyard without turning on any lights, as the glow from my neighbor's house provides enough illumination. While I was in the bathroom, I glanced outside and noticed something odd. There was a car parked directly facing my house in the cul-de-sac. If you're familiar with cul-de-sacs, you know cars are usually parked on the curves or edges of the street. This car, however, was directly facing the curve behind my house. It struck me as strange. If the person was visiting someone, why not park in one of the driveways? The elderly couple who lived behind me certainly weren't throwing a big party, and it would be pretty foolish to park like that. As I looked at the car, I could make out a figure sitting in the driver's seat. Since the lights in my bathroom were off, whoever was in the car probably couldn't see me through the window. Determined to figure out who it was, I went downstairs, grabbed my binoculars from my dad's closet, and headed back to the bathroom to get a better look. Mind you, it was around 3 in the morning. Who would just sit in their car in the middle of winter? When I peered outside with the binoculars, the car was gone. I was initially relieved, assuming I had just overreacted and the person had left after visiting someone. But then I thought, what's the likelihood that as soon as I noticed the car, it immediately drove off? I calmed myself down and went back to bed. The next day, a mix of boredom and curiosity took over, and I decided it was time to investigate. I went over to the backyard cul-de-sac to see if I could find any trace of the person from the night before, but there was nothing. I also asked my neighbors if they'd had any visitors recently, hoping it would shed some light on why the car was parked there in the first place. I spoke to the owners of the 2 houses on the cul-de-sac's curves, but they both said they hadn't had anyone over. I took their numbers and left. That's when the paranoia really set in. Something wasn't right. I had no way of knowing if the person would come back, and I couldn't exactly call the police over a situation that wasn't a crime. So, I decided to wait it out and see if they returned. That night, I just chatted with my college friends about the whole thing over video call. Most of them thought I was either exaggerating or just freaking myself out. I logged off and watched Netflix for a while, but I couldn't stop thinking about checking the window. My friends reassured me it was nothing, and honestly, I'm kind of a coward, so I didn't check. But then, around 3:24 a.m., the exact same time I had woken up the night before, I decided, screw it, I had to check. And that's when I totally lost it. The same car was parked, and a man in a black hoodie and ski mask was standing next to it, staring right at my house. I freaked out, ran to grab my phone, and tried calling my neighbors. No one answered. I ran back to the window, only to see that he was now in my backyard. This wasn't a burglary attempt, because if it was, he'd be trying to break into the house or looking through the lower windows. This felt like something else entirely, like stalking. At this point, I had enough, so I opened the window and screamed, "Who the hell are you?" There was no response, so I shouted, "I'm calling the police. Get off my property." That's when he finally spoke. He said, "Have a nice day," in this cheerful, almost casual tone, like a cashier saying goodbye at the store. He then calmly waltzed, and I mean literally waltzed, back to his car and drove off. Of course, I called the police right away. They asked if any of my friends were pranking me, and I told them no. Like I mentioned before, this is a small town, and the police didn't really do anything. They said to call them again if anything like this happens. Now I'm terrified. It's currently 11 p.m., and I have no idea if he'll return tonight. I'll be keeping an eye on the window, and I'll update you all if anything happens. Wish me luck. Edit 12:24 a.m. *. I'm still staring out the window, waiting for him, and I've informed my neighbors. They've said they'll keep an eye out too. Honestly, I'm pretty nervous, but at least I've got their support. I just want this to be over. 01:24 a.m. *. Nothing yet. A half hour ago, I got a call from my mom. I didn't mention any of this to her. I just told her I loved her and hung up. My friends have been Snapchatting me, asking for updates, and I told them I'd try to get a picture if I can. If I do, I'll be sure to share it with you all. 01:34 a.m. *. My neighbors said they saw a car parked up the street, but one of them, a guy in his 40s, said he was going to check it out. I can't stop tapping my foot now. 01:37 a.m. * false alarm. Turns out it was just a family's car that had just gotten home. Still, this suspense is killing me. 01:48 a.m. * One of the neighbors just said he's heading to bed for the night. Well, things aren't looking great. but I just hope my neighbors can stay vigilant for the rest of the night. I honestly don't think I'll be able to sleep at all tonight. I've already downed 2 cups of coffee, so I'm as alert as I can be. 02:11 a.m. asterisk. I was staring out the window when I heard a rustling sound in the bushes in my backyard. I couldn't tell if it was the guy, the wind, or just some animal, so I flipped on the backyard light to get a better look. But there was nothing. I think this paranoia is really starting to mess with me. 02:17 a.m. asterisk. Alright, this is it. I'm definitely losing it. I heard a loud crash from the kitchen and ran down to see what happened. Turns out a pan had fallen off the shelf. Nothing too major, but it scared the life out of me. I went back upstairs and started staring out the window again, this time at one of the streets behind my backyard, which is about 200 yards away, give or take, through the trees. That's when I saw a car at the corner flashing its high beams repeatedly, then turning right and driving away from the street leading to my house. I don't know what the hell is going on, but is this guy seriously trying to mess with me? 02:40 a.m. asterisk. So, right now, I'm at my neighbor's house, staring into my backyard and the cul-de-sac. I just bolted out the back door and rang their doorbell as fast as I could. They saw me coming and opened the door right away. Thank God. Honestly, that was one of the scariest things I've ever done. I was convinced the guy would pull up any second. But now, I guess I'm just waiting and hoping for the best. 02:51 a.m. asterisk. So far, nothing unusual has happened, but I'm dreading what's going to happen at 3:24. I did see 2 cars pass by my house, but I couldn't tell if they were the same one the stalker had been using. I also couldn't tell if it was the same car passing both ways. Is this guy messing with my head? I'm ready to call 911 any second now. I called my parents and told them what's been going on, and they said they'll be home tomorrow. 03:01 a.m. asterisk. Yeah, guys, he's definitely coming. A car just came up the cul-de-sac, started flashing its high beams again, and then left. He's definitely trying to screw with my mind. Here's the rewritten version. Thank God I left the house when I did, because the direction he's heading is definitely bringing him back around to my place. Honestly, I'm scared even though I'm not even in the house anymore. If I see him outside of his car, I'm definitely calling the police. 03:11 a.m. asterisk. My neighbor and I agreed that we'll leave and head to the police station as soon as we see him park near my house. My heart is pounding, and I can't believe I was sitting at home alone for all those hours. What was I even thinking? It's now 03:20 a.m. and still nothing. Even if he doesn't show, I'm absolutely not going back. I'm not even sure if I'll stay here either. This is hands down the scariest thing that's ever happened to me. 03:25 a.m. asterisk. Guys, there's a car parked in my driveway. I'm getting the hell out of here. I'll try to update you guys later when they arrest him, but I'm leaving right now. 01:15 p.m. asterisk. For those of you asking, I'm safe. I went to the police station, got questioned, and they're working on finding the guy, but they haven't tracked him down yet. I ended up at a hotel to get some sleep, just woke up. I'll update you all more soon, but for now, I'm just trying to sort things out. And seriously, thanks so much for the support, everyone. Hey everyone. So, around 3 a.m. last night, my friend woke me up, saying I needed to check something out. I quickly grabbed the revolver I'd left on the table next to the couch, and we headed out to the front porch. From there, we could see a car parked down the road. It was about 300 yards away, still visible because of a streetlight. Here's how the conversation went, as best as I can remember, between me and Tom. Yeah, you see that car down there? I was dozing off, and the moment I woke up, it just appeared out of nowhere and just sat there. How long do you think it's been there? I'm not sure. I stared at it for a good 2 minutes. After that, I grabbed my flashlight and started flashing it on and off. When the car took off, some guy got out, waved, and walked into the woods. There's a wooded area near Tom's house that leads to a large open field in his backyard. There's a fence dividing the field from the backyard, but it's easy to climb over. Do you think we should check it out? Nah. This guy could be walking through the woods and come back around to my back door. You stay here, I'll go check it out. Okay? All right, but if it's a gray Volkswagen, we need to leave. Got it. I want you to record the license plate too, and look inside for anything unusual. Look for stuff like ropes, knives, duct tape, anything sketchy that might make us need to leave. Okay? Yeah, okay. Just stay inside and protect the house. Make sure no one gets in. Okay? I went back inside the house and stared out the window while Tom approached the car with his 12 gauge. I moved to the back of the house and looked out the window facing the field. That's when I saw a figure walking across it. It was weird because there were no houses in sight, and he seemed to be walking toward nothing. He climbed over a hill and disappeared from view. I went back to the front window to check on Tom, and he was still inspecting the car. For a second, I felt a sense of relief, thinking maybe I was just overreacting. But then the home phone rang. I looked at the caller ID. It was my area code, not Tom's. By this point, my phone was still on airplane mode, so I figured it was either someone from my neighborhood or family trying to get in touch. I felt a bit strange answering a call at a house that wasn't mine, but with everything going on, I couldn't take any chances, so I picked up. Hello? Excuse me? Who's this? Oh, excuse me, sir. My apologies. Is this the homeowner? No, I'm just a friend of the homeowner. He's outside right now. Who's this? At that moment, a sinking feeling hit me. One of those gut punches you get when you realize you've messed up. I had just revealed that I was here alone, and whoever was on the other end realized that too. Hello? Who else is with you, sir? Is it just you? I was shaking so badly I could barely speak without stumbling over my words. The only thing I could think to do was lie, and lie hard. No, we're having a party. There are a couple of other people here. Who's calling? Are you sure about that? I was walking by and saw there are only 2 cars in the driveway. At this point, I completely lost it.
Listen, man.
Just tell me who you are and why the hell you're calling this house so late. Hello? Can you just tell me who you are? I'm sorry, sir. I must have the wrong number. Tell the homeowner to call back. Thank you. And then he hung up. Tom came back a minute later and said the car wasn't a Volkswagen, but it did have a license plate. He mentioned that the windows were tinted and the doors were locked, so he couldn't make out much more. I told him about the phone call, and he said he didn't recognize the number. He tried calling back, but no one picked up. He also called from a restricted number, but still no answer. An hour later, we were sitting on the porch when we suddenly heard a loud slam from the back door. We exchanged looks, and Tom motioned for me to follow him around back. We didn't find anything unusual and couldn't see any footprints, so we went back to the front porch after searching for a while. It was around 4 a.m. by this point. We didn't notice until about 10 minutes later that the car that had been parked 300 yards away was now gone, and we hadn't even realized it had left. I hadn't gotten any sleep since the night before, so I told Tom that I wanted to leave. I needed to keep moving. He said he wanted to come with me. He locked up his doors, grabbed some guns, and we left at 6 in the morning. The police still haven't done anything, despite all the information I've given them. Now, I've been on the road all day with Tom. I drove most of the way while he slept in the back. We're currently at a McDonald's while I write this. We joked that if we end up getting kidnapped, murdered, or attacked, at least someone will know from these videos, right? I'm just so tired, guys. Tired of all of this. Tired of being stalked. Tired of being hunted. And tired of writing these damn posts. I just want it all to end. If anything happens tonight, I'll keep you updated. But for now, goodbye. The moonlight filtered through the thick trees, casting unsettling shadows across the forest floor. I never imagined that my usual night patrol would spiral into a fight for my life. But as I crouched behind a fallen oak, my hand shaking on the radio, I realized that everything was about to change. My name is Jack, and I've been a park ranger at Whispering Pines National Park for nearly 10 years. I thought I knew these woods inside and out, but I quickly discovered that I didn't know them as well as I believed. It was a crisp autumn night, the kind where your breath clouds in front of you and every step on the crunching leaves feels like it echoes through the trees. Lately, I'd been on high alert. In the past week, we'd come across several animal carcasses, clearly mutilated. Signs pointed to poaching, but catching poachers in the act was nearly impossible, like looking for a needle in a haystack. I had been walking my usual route for about an hour when I first heard it. A faint murmur of voices, barely audible over the sounds of the forest. I stopped dead in my tracks, straining to listen. There it was again, definitely human voices, and not the kind of noise you'd expect from lost hikers at this hour. My heart started to race as I crouched low, moving closer to the sound, using the brush as cover. The voices grew clearer, and I could make out a few details. Several male voices, speaking in low but eager tones. Then, the unmistakable sound of metal, what could only be firearms being handled. I crept to the edge of a small clearing, and that's when I saw them. 5 men, clad in camouflage, surrounding the carcass of a young elk. High-powered rifles were propped up against nearby trees, and I could see the gleam of hunting knives under the moonlight. My stomach twisted. This wasn't just some random poaching. This was an operation, a well-organized one. I reached for my radio, ready to call for backup, but paused. We were short-staffed, and the closest ranger was at least an hour away. By the time help showed up, these guys would be long gone. I had to act, and fast. Taking a deep breath, I stepped into the clearing, my hand resting on my sidearm. "Gentlemen," I called, keeping my voice calm, "I'm going to need you to lower your weapons and put your hands where I can see them." For a brief moment, everything was quiet. Then chaos erupted. 2 of the men immediately reached for their rifles. Another lunged at me, a knife flashing in his hand. I managed to dodge him, drawing my gun in a smooth motion. "Stop right there," I shouted, my voice ringing out in the stillness. I said, "Drop your weapons." The man with the knife hesitated, but the others were undeterred. One of them, a burly man with a thick beard, pointed his rifle at me. "You're outnumbered, Ranger," he growled. "I walk away now and will forget this ever happened." I stood my ground, my gun trained on him, acutely aware of how outmatched I was. "Can't do that," I said. "You boys are coming with me." The bearded man's eyes narrowed. "Have it your way," he said, and fired. The shot went wide, splintering the trunk of a tree just inches from my head. I dove for cover behind a large boulder, my heart pounding in my ears. This was bad. This was very, very bad. I could hear them spreading out, trying to flank me. I risked a glance around the edge of the boulder and barely pulled back in time as another shot ricocheted off the rock face. "Come on out, Ranger," one of them called. "We just want to talk." "Yeah, right." I knew full well that if I showed myself, I was as good as dead. These men had too much to lose to leave any witnesses. I fumbled for my radio, keeping my gun trained on the direction of their voices. "This is Ranger Collins," I whispered urgently. "I need immediate backup at Sector 7. Armed poachers, shots fired." I repeat, shots fired. Static was my only reply. Either we were too deep in the woods for a signal, or they were jamming communications somehow. Either way, I was on my own. A twig snapped to my left and I whirled, firing off a warning shot. "Stay back," I shouted. "Next one won't miss." Laughter echoed through the trees, big words for a man hiding behind a rock. One of them taunted. I gritted my teeth, trying to think. I couldn't stay here forever, but making a run for it would be suicide. I needed a plan. My eyes fell on the elk carcass, still lying in the middle of the clearing. An idea began to form. It was risky, but it might be my only chance. Keeping low, I shrugged off my jacket and stuffed it with leaves and underbrush. It wasn't much, but in the dark, it might pass for a human form, at least long enough to serve as a distraction. "All right," I called out, trying to sound defeated. "I'm coming out. Don't shoot." I heard them shuffling, readying their weapons. Slowly, I raised my makeshift dummy above the boulder with one hand, while I stayed hidden. Hands where we can see them. One of them barked. I lifted the dummy higher, then suddenly flung it to the side. As I'd hoped, they took the bait. Multiple shots rang out, shredding my jacket. In that moment of confusion, I sprang into action. I sprinted for the elk carcass, diving behind it, just as they realized their mistake. Bullets whizzed overhead, but the bulk of the animal provided better cover than the boulder had. Now for phase 2 of my desperate plan. I took aim at the elk's bloated stomach and fired. The carcass burst open, releasing a stench so foul it made my eyes water. I heard retching and cursing from the poachers. Using the distraction, I made a break for the tree line. I crashed through the underbrush branches, whipping at my face as I ran. I could hear them behind me, but the head start and the nauseating smell had given me an advantage. I ran like I'd never run before, zigging and zagging through the trees. My lungs burned and my legs ached, but I didn't dare slow down. I knew these woods, but so did they. My only hope was to make it back to my Jeep before they caught up. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, I burst out of the tree line onto the narrow dirt road where I'd parked. My Jeep sat there, a beautiful sight in the moonlight. Just as I reached for the door handle, a shot rang out. Pain exploded in my left arm and I stumbled, crying out. I turned to see the bearded man emerging from the woods, his rifle trained on me. "End of the line, Ranger," he said, a cruel smile on his face. I leaned against the Jeep, my injured arm hanging uselessly at my side. Blood soaked my sleeve, and the pain was making it hard to think straight, but I wasn't done yet. "You're right," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "It's the end of the line for you," he sneered. His expression shifted from confusion to realization, his eyes widening as the sound I'd been praying for, the distant wail of sirens, reached his ears. In that brief moment of distraction, I surged forward, slamming into him and bringing him down to the ground. We wrestled in the dirt, both of us struggling to control the rifle. Despite the searing pain in my arm, adrenaline coursed through me, giving me the strength I needed. With a final burst of effort, I managed to yank the gun from his hands and swung the stock down hard against his head. He went limp beneath me. I scrambled to my feet, gripping the rifle tightly in my uninjured hand, just as the flashing lights of several patrol cars emerged through the trees, casting everything in a blur of red and blue. Reinforcements had arrived. The following hours felt like a blur. The remaining poachers were rounded up, my arm was treated, and I provided statement after statement. By the time the sun began to rise, casting the sky in vibrant oranges and pinks, it was all over. I sat on the tailgate of an ambulance, a shock blanket draped around my shoulders, when my boss approached. His gaze held both pride and concern. "You did good, Jack," he said, patting me on my uninjured shoulder. "Those guys were part of a ring we've been trying to dismantle for months. You just cracked the case wide open." I nodded, too drained to feel much other than relief that I was still breathing. "Get some rest," he added, "and when you're back on your feet, well, let's just say there might be a promotion in your future." As he walked away, I looked out at the forest. The same trees that had been the setting of a violent battle only hours before now looked serene in the morning light. I knew I would never see these woods the same way again, but I also knew I'd be back. This place was my home, and I had nearly died protecting it. If anything, this ordeal had only reinforced my determination. There would be other poachers, other threats, and I would be here standing watch. Because that's what rangers do. We protect what can't protect itself, no matter the cost. I climbed into the ambulance, wincing as my injured arm shifted uncomfortably. As we drove away, I stole one last glance at the endless sea of green behind us. Yeah, I'd be back. These woods hadn't seen the last of Ranger Jack Collins. Not by a long shot. The windshield wipers struggled to clear away the downpour as I squinted through the glass, desperately searching for any sign of the road ahead. I'd been driving for hours, trying to outrun the storm, but it seemed relentless, determined to chase me down. Another flash of lightning lit up the landscape, and I caught sight of a worn wooden sign, "Millbrook, 5 miles, I exhaled in relief. Maybe I could find a motel there and wait out the rain. But as I continued on, the storm only worsened. The rain was coming down so heavily now that I could barely see a few feet in front of my car. I slowed to a crawl, my grip tight on the steering wheel. That's when I saw it. A dirt road branching off to the right with a sign reading "Shortcut to Millbrook." I hesitated. I'd heard enough stories about shortcuts that ended badly. But the thought of escaping the treacherous main road and reaching town faster was too tempting to ignore. I turned onto the dirt road, feeling the car jolt as it hit the uneven surface. For a while, things seemed fine. The road twisted through thick forest, the trees offering some cover from the worst of the downpour. But as I ventured deeper into the woods, an uneasy feeling began to settle over me. The road was getting narrower, muddier. I hadn't seen another vehicle or any sign of civilization for miles. Just as I started to feel like I'd made a huge mistake, my headlights caught sight of something ahead. A farmhouse, old but well-kept, sat in a clearing. Warm light spilled from its windows, and I could make out a barn and a few outbuildings nearby. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Even if this wasn't Millbrook, surely the people here could give me directions. I pulled up to the house and killed the engine, taking a deep breath before stepping out into the rain and running to the porch. Just as I reached for the door to knock, it swung open. A man stood there, tall and lean, with weathered features that hinted at a life spent outdoors. He looked at me with a mix of surprise and something I couldn't quite place. Maybe suspicion. "Can I help you?" he asked in a gruff voice. "I'm sorry to bother you," I said, trying to keep my teeth from chattering as the cold rain soaked through my clothes. "I'm trying to get to Millbrook, but I think I took a wrong turn. Could you point me in the right direction?" The man's expression softened slightly. "Millbrook? You're a long way off, miss. That road doesn't go through anymore. Washed out in the floods last spring." My heart sank. "Oh no, I don't suppose there's another way around." He shook his head. "Not in this weather. These back roads turn into rivers when it rains like this. You'd best come inside and wait it out." I hesitated. Every instinct told me to politely decline and try to find my way back to the main road. But a particularly loud crack of thunder made me jump, and I realized I didn't have much choice. "Thank you," I said, following him into the house. The interior was cozy, if a bit cluttered. Mismatched furniture filled the living room, and the walls were covered with old photographs and bits of farming equipment that seemed more decorative than functional. A fire crackled in the hearth, and I gravitated towards it, grateful for the warmth. "I'm John," the man said, closing the door behind us. "My wife, Martha, is in the kitchen. Make yourself comfortable. I'll let her know we have a guest." As John disappeared down a hallway, I took the opportunity to look around more closely. The photos on the walls showed a family: John, a woman I assumed was Martha, and 2 children at various ages. But there was something off about them. The clothes and hairstyles looked outdated, like they were from decades ago. I was squinting at one particularly faded photo when a voice behind me made me jump. "Supper's almost ready, if you'd like to join us." I turned to see a woman standing in the doorway to what I assumed was the kitchen. Like John, she had a weathered look about her, but her smile was kind. "Oh, I couldn't impose," I started to say, but Martha waved away my protest. "Nonsense. We don't get many visitors out here. It'll be nice to have someone new at the table." I followed her into the kitchen, where the smell of something savory made my stomach growl. I hadn't realized how hungry I was. John was already seated at the table, and Martha gestured for me to take a seat across from him. As we ate, I tried to make conversation, but found my hosts oddly reticent. They answered my questions politely enough, but offered little information of their own. When I asked about the town or their neighbors, they exchanged a glance I couldn't interpret. Not much to tell. John said finally we keep to ourselves mostly. After dinner, I offered to help with the dishes, but Martha shooed me away. "You're our guest. John will show you to the spare room. You can head out in the morning when the storm's passed." I followed John upstairs, my unease growing with each step. The second floor was dark, lit only by the flashlight John carried. He showed me to a small room at the end of the hall. Bathrooms across the way, he said. If you need anything, just holler. As he turned to leave, I blurted out, "Where are your children?" John froze, his hand on the doorknob. "What children?" "In the photos downstairs," I said. I saw pictures of 2 kids. For a long moment, John didn't move. When he finally turned to face me, his expression was unreadable in the dim light. "Those pictures are very old," he said softly. "Good night." He closed the door, leaving me alone in the darkness. I fumbled for the light switch, but nothing happened when I flipped it. Power must be out, I thought, trying to calm my racing heart. I sat on the edge of the bed, my mind whirling. Something was very wrong here, but I couldn't put my finger on what. The storm continued to rage outside, rain lashing against the windows. I knew I wouldn't be able to leave until morning, but the thought of spending the night in this strange house filled me with dread. Unable to sleep, I decided to explore a bit. I crept out of the room and down the hall, using my phone's flashlight to guide me. The house was silent except for the sound of the rain and the occasional creak of old wood settling. I made my way back downstairs, drawn to those old photographs. In the harsh light of my phone, they looked even stranger than before. The faces were blurred, as if they'd been deliberately smudged. And in every photo, no matter what the setting, the same shadowy figure lurked in the background. A floorboard creaked behind me, and I spun around, my heart in my throat. Martha stood there, her face half in shadow. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked, her voice oddly flat. "I'm sorry," I stammered. I was curious about the photos." Martha moved closer, her eyes never leaving my face. "You shouldn't be down here," she said. "It's not safe." "What do you mean?" I asked, backing away slowly. "What's not safe?" But Martha didn't answer. She just kept advancing, her expression unchanging. I bumped into something solid and turned to find John blocking my path to the stairs. "I'm sorry," he said, and he genuinely sounded it. "But you've seen too much. We can't let you leave now." Panic surged through me. I ducked under John's arm and ran for the front door, but it wouldn't budge. I could hear John and Martha behind me, their footsteps slow and deliberate. "You don't understand," Martha was saying. "We're trying to protect you. The storm, it's not natural. Nothing here is." I ran from room to room, looking for a way out, but every door and window was locked tight. John and Martha followed, never rushing, always just a few steps behind. "What do you want from me?" I cried, backed into the corner of the kitchen. John sighed, a heavy, resigned sound. "We don't want anything from you. We're trapped here, just like you. The storm never ends. The night never passes. We're stuck in a loop, reliving the same night over and over again." "That's impossible," I protested. But even as I spoke, I felt the weight of the truth pressing in on me. From the moment I stepped into this house, I had felt it. The distortion of time, the feeling that something wasn't right, that reality had subtly shifted. "We thought we could save you," Martha said. "If we kept you here, maybe you'd be spared from what's out there. But it doesn't work that way. It never does." Just then, a blinding flash of lightning lit up the kitchen. The headlights barely pierced the heavy rain as I made my way down the winding country road. It was well after midnight, and fatigue had settled in from hours of driving. That's when I saw him, standing on the side of the road, drenched to the bone with his thumb outstretched. Against my better judgment, I slowed down. Little did I know, this simple decision would lead me straight into a nightmare. I pulled over, my wipers struggling to clear the rain. The man jogged to the passenger side, and I leaned over to unlock the door. He slid in, the scent of soaked clothes mixed with something else that I couldn't quite place. "Thanks, mate," he said, pushing his soaked hood back. "Thought I'd be out here all night." I nodded and pulled back onto the road. "No problem. Where are you headed?" "Next town over, if that's all right," he answered, his voice oddly calm considering the storm. I glanced at him. He was younger than I first thought, maybe in his mid-20s, with sharp features and eyes that caught the faint light from the dashboard. I'm Jake, I said, hoping a little conversation would keep me awake for the drive. Matt, he replied simply. We fell into a quiet drive, the sound of the rain and the wipers the only noise. I tried to focus on the road, but I couldn't stop glancing at my passenger. Something about him felt off, but I couldn't figure out what. So, what brings you out on a night like this? I asked, attempting to break the silence. Matt shrugged. Sometimes you just need to get away. You know? I nodded, though I didn't really understand. Who hitchhikes in a storm like this? What about you? He asked. Long drive. Yeah, I replied, coming back from a business trip. Should have stopped for the night, but I wanted to get home. Matt hummed quietly, his gaze fixed ahead on the road. The rain had only gotten heavier. I leaned forward, squinting through the windshield. Crazy weather, I remarked, more to fill the silence than anything. He didn't answer. I glanced over at Matt, and my heart skipped a beat. The passenger seat was empty. I slammed on the brakes, the car sliding slightly on the slick road. I quickly scanned the car, half expecting to see him in the back seat, but it was empty except for me. My mind raced. Had I imagined him? Was I so exhausted that I'd hallucinated the entire conversation? But no, the seat where he had been sitting was still damp. The musty smell of his soaked clothes lingered in the air. With shaking hands, I put the car in park and turned on the interior lights. I searched the car, looking under the seats, even popping the trunk, though I knew it was impossible for him to have gotten there. Nothing. No trace of Matt. I got back in the car, my clothes now soaked from the rain, and sat there trying to make sense of what had just happened. There was no way he could have jumped out. We'd been going at least 50 miles per hour, and I would have noticed the door opening. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. Maybe I had dozed off for a second and dreamed the whole thing. Sleep deprivation could do strange things to a person's mind, right? But as I went to put the car back in drive, something caught my eye. There on the dashboard was a small puddle of water, and next to it, unmistakably, was a muddy fingerprint. A chill ran down my spine. This was real. Matt had been here, and now he was gone. I put the car in drive and pressed the gas pedal to the floor, desperate to put as much distance between me and the stretch of road as possible. My mind whirled with possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. As I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Every shadow seemed to move. Every reflection in the rearview mirror made me jump. I found myself checking the back seat obsessively, half expecting to see Matt's face grinning back at me. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, I saw lights ahead, a gas station. I pulled in, the bright fluorescent lights a stark contrast to the dark, wet night. I sat there for a moment, engine idling, trying to decide what to do. Should I call the police? Would they even believe me? Finally, I worked up the courage to go inside. The bell above the door jingled as I entered, making me jump. The clerk, an older man with a scraggly beard, looked up from his magazine. Nasty night to be out, he commented. I nodded, trying to appear calm. Yeah, it's pretty bad out there. Hey, this might sound crazy, but have you seen anyone else come through here tonight? A young guy, maybe mid-20s. The clerk furrowed his brow. Can't say that I have. You're the first customer I've had in hours. Everything okay? I hesitated. Should I tell him? Would he think I was crazy? I picked up a hitchhiker a few miles back. I started, the words tumbling out, and then he just disappeared from inside my moving car. I expected the clerk to laugh to tell me I must be tired and seeing things. Instead, his face paled. You picked him up on Blackwood Road? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, a sense of dread growing in the pit of my stomach. The clerk sighed, rubbing his face with his hands. You're not the first, you know. It's been happening for years. Always on rainy nights, always on that stretch of road. What are you talking about? I asked, though part of me didn't want to know the answer. There was an accident about 10 years back, the clerk said, his eyes distant. Young guy hitchhiking in a storm. Driver didn't see him until it was too late. Hit him head on. They say he died instantly. I felt the blood drain from my face, but I talked to him. He was in my car. The clerk nodded solemnly. They all say that. Sometimes he talks, sometimes he doesn't, but he always disappears. I stumbled back, gripping the counter for support. This couldn't be real. Ghosts weren't real. I was tired. That's all. I was seeing things. Look, son, the clerk said, his voice gentle. Why don't you sit down for a bit? I've got some coffee in the back. You look like you could use it. I nodded numbly, following him to a small break room. He poured me a cup of coffee, the aroma helping to ground me somewhat. What do I do now? I asked, my voice shaking. The clerk shrugged. Not much you can do. He's never hurt anyone far as I know. Just gives them a good scare. My advice, get some rest and try to put it behind you. But as I sat there sipping the too hot coffee, I knew I'd never be able to forget. The image of Matt, his eyes reflecting the dashboard lights, was burned into my memory. After a while, I thanked the clerk and headed back to my car. The rain had finally let up, and a full moon peeked through the breaking clouds. I took a deep breath, trying to steel myself for the rest of the drive home. As I reached for the door handle, I froze. There in the back seat was a human shape. My heart pounded as I leaned in for a closer look. It was my jacket, the jacket I could have sworn I'd left at home. I laughed, the sound bordering on hysterical. My imagination was really getting the best of me. I got in the car, shaking my head at my own foolishness. As I attempted to start the engine, something in the rearview mirror caught my attention. For a brief moment, I could have sworn I saw Matt's face, his eyes locking with mine in the reflection. But when I spun around to check, the back seat was empty. I floored the gas pedal, my tires screeching against the slick pavement. As I sped away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Every shadow along the road seemed to be a person. Every reflection in my mirrors made me flinch. I made it home faster than I ever thought possible, my hands trembling as I unlocked the front door. I deliberately kept the lights off, not wanting to see if anyone or anything had followed me back. As I lay awake in bed that night, my mind replayed everything, and I couldn't stop thinking about Matt. Was he out there still, thumb outstretched on that desolate road? How many other innocent drivers would fall victim, only to be left unsettled, questioning their grip on reality? One thing was clear: I would never pick up another hitchhiker again. And on stormy nights, Blackwood Road was a place I would avoid at all costs. Because now I understood the truth. Some ghosts don't remain in the past. Sometimes they hitch a ride into the present, forcing us to face a reality we aren't ready to accept. This just happened a few hours ago. I've already called the police and reported the incident, and I'm home now, thankfully safe. I'm still in shock, to be honest. I figured writing it down might help me process what happened, and I guess this is as good a place as any to share the story. I finished work early today, so I decided to go for a run. I headed out around 4:30 p.m., and I normally take a route that crosses several busy roads. But today, I thought that would be too impractical, so I chose an alternate path along a canal towpath and some trails through the woods. I figured it would be quieter and less crowded. Everything seemed fine at first. I was keeping a steady pace until I hit a pathway about 6 kilometers into my run. It's a long, straight path with a canal to the left and an old wasteland to the right, where a few factories once stood. The factories were mostly torn down, but there were still remnants of them scattered around, some old factory parts that were never fully demolished. The area had been abandoned for as long as I could remember, with trees and weeds overtaking the land. As I approached one of the factory remnants, I noticed a rough-looking guy sitting on the wall with his legs dangling down. As soon as he saw me, he jumped to his feet and shouted something at me, but I couldn't make out what he said. When I was almost level with him, I heard him call out, "Wait there! Can you help me find my phone?" He said this while running down some old metal fire escape steps. I stopped, since I had reached the bottom of the steps and was only a few feet away, separated by a fence. It was an old iron fence, the kind with vertical metal bars and spikes on top, like you'd see around churches or similar places. He asked if I could help him find his phone, saying he had dropped it somewhere nearby and wondered if I could call his number so he could hear it. I felt awkward saying no, especially since my phone was right there on my arm, so I agreed. I asked for the number, took my phone off my arm, and unlocked it. He rattled off the number quickly, but something felt off. It didn't start with a 7, which made me start feeling uneasy. I typed in the first 7 digits, and he started glancing around, saying he could hear it and asking me to come over and help him look for it. I was about to tell him I hadn't even finished dialing when a much bigger guy suddenly appeared from behind the wall to my right. He was also really scruffy looking, and from the look of his eyes, it seemed like he was on drugs. He came out saying that he could hear the phone ringing over towards him and beckoned me to come through a gap in the fence and help look. The first guy then said, "It's ringing." "Yeah." And I told him it was even though I still hadn't dialed the last digits. And now I was sure that they were trying to lure me to come over to that side of the fence. After 2 or 3 times of them both beckoning me to come and help, always insisting they could hear the ring, I heard the second guy say, "Yo, he's not gonna fall for it." He said it in a hushed way as if he thought that I wouldn't hear, but with it being out in the middle of nowhere, I could clearly understand what he said. The first guy then started acting quite aggressive and punching a tree, telling me he needed the phone badly and how his whole life was on the phone, telling me to come and help them look for it. While he was punching the tree and ranting, the second guy had taken a few steps away to the right, meaning I couldn't keep my eyes on both of them at the same time. It was after 5 p.m. by this point and had gotten dark all of a sudden, which made the whole thing even more unsettling. I noticed that there was a gap in the fence where some of the bars had been removed right where the guy was heading, and I decided at that point to just get out of there and made a run for it. Neither of them said anything as I ran away, which makes me sure that they had malicious intentions. If they genuinely lost their phone and needed help, I would expect them to shout, "Where are you going?" or something to try to get me to come back. But they didn't shout anything. After sprinting for a good 20 to 30 seconds, I turned to see if they were chasing me. They both were stood on the path around where the gap in the fence had been but weren't chasing me. They were just standing there watching me run away. I continued running away but kept looking back every few seconds until I was out of sight. It was at this point I got off the canal path and onto the roads. The person I spoke to on the phone to report it took my details in the descriptions, but seems to think it wasn't anything worth worrying about, but said it will be investigated. The whole incident has left me a bit unnerved, and I am pretty sure I won't be jogging that route alone anytime soon. When my mom was 16, a year before she got pregnant with me, she had the same dream every night for about a year. In the dream, she and a boy around her age would be surrounded by a group of men in a cemetery. My mom didn't know who the boy was, but every night, a man from the group would stand in front of them and ask, "Would you die for him?" My mom would always answer no, since she had no idea who the boy was. The man would then ask the boy, "Would you die for her?" The boy would also answer no. But one night, the man asked the boy first, "Will you die for her?" He said no, as usual. The man then turned to my mom and asked, "Will you die for him?" She's not sure why she said yes, maybe out of curiosity or fear of what would happen, but she did. The man stared at her for a moment and then said, "Your fate is sealed, and so is his." But nothing happened this time. He didn't hurt them. She woke up. That same day, my mom was a model, and she had a fashion show in a nearby city. Her aunt came to drive her, and her best friend joined them for the trip. Everything seemed normal that morning. My mom got dressed, and they piled into the car for the 3 to 4 hour drive. About 10 minutes into the drive, my mom realized she had forgotten something at home. They had plenty of time, so they turned around to get it. While driving back, they were singing along to the music when my mom's friend suddenly asked to turn it down. "Do you hear that?" she asked. My mom and her aunt went silent, listening carefully. They heard a strange scraping sound, like metal scraping on concrete. They looked around, but there was no source of the noise, and no other cars were on the road. When they got back home, my mom ran inside, and her aunt and friend checked the car to make sure the noise wasn't coming from it. Everything looked fine, and my grandfather gave them the all clear. This took about 20 to 30 minutes, so they shrugged it off and headed back toward the highway. When they finally reached the highway, it was blocked off with police cars. There had been a terrible accident, and one of the lanes was shut down for cleanup. My mom's aunt approached the scene, and a cop waved them down, asking them to stop. "Give us a second to clear this lane of debris," the officer said. "What happened?" her aunt asked, clearly shocked. "It was a head-on collision," the officer replied. "When did this happen?" "We were just here 30 minutes ago," her aunt said. "It happened about 30 minutes ago," the officer explained. "You didn't see anything?" They explained they had heard a strange noise that sounded like metal scraping on concrete, and the officer looked at them, concerned. "Is everyone okay?" her aunt asked. "No, ma'am," the officer said. "You ladies are lucky. If you had been even 3 seconds later, that could have been you." With that, the officer waved them through and told them to have a nice day. As they passed the wreckage, my mom looked out the window and saw a body being removed from one of the cars. Her heart sank when she realized it was the boy from her dream. She never had that dream again. When I was 16, I was at an all-boys boarding school in Tennessee. I was going through that phase of hating everything about the place and resented my parents for sending me there. I spent the first week being angry, wishing I could just turn 18 and leave so I could start my own life and do whatever I wanted, like any typical rebellious teenager. But after a week, when my anger started to fade, I thought, well, since I'm stuck here, I might as well try to make the best of it and make some friends. During one of the recreation periods, I noticed a few guys from my dorm hanging around a lunch bin next to the basketball court, so I walked over to try to be social. When I joined them, a student, let's call him Gavin, was in the middle of telling the others about an eerie experience he had while doing chores in our dorm. I arrived in the middle of his story, but from what I gathered, it was Gavin's turn to clean the hallway of our dorm, as it was his room's week to take care of the entire common area and hallway. While cleaning, he started feeling like someone was watching him. He looked around but saw no one. The hall was empty. Everyone else in the dorm was cleaning other areas of the building, so Gavin was alone on that floor. He tried to brush it off, thinking he was just tired. Coming from a big family, he'd never really been alone, so he figured it was just the experience of true solitude. He kept working, but then he said he began to feel goosebumps all over his body and a chill creeping down the back of his neck, like someone was standing right behind him, breathing. Gavin didn't want to turn around, so he ran until he found some other guys working and pretended like everything was fine. At that time, I was a skeptic when it came to anything paranormal. Sure, I watched ghost hunting shows, but I thought they were just for laughs. Do people really believe in that stuff? But then another student, let's call him Adam, spoke up, sharing his own encounter in Dorm 2, which lined up with what Gavin had experienced. Gavin's story stuck with me throughout the rest of the recreation period. By the time we went back to our dorms for dinner and homework, I couldn't stop thinking about it. As I laid in bed before lights out, I replayed the whole thing in my mind, imagining the entire experience. The fact that I was staying in the exact same dorm made me feel both excited and a little nervous. Lights out came and it was time for bed. Even though I had been there for a whole week thus far, I never truly got used to sleeping in a foreign bed and wished to be back home in Boston in my own room, playing video games and sleeping in my own bed. I guess I was deeply fantasizing about me being back home because I ended up falling asleep. While during my sleep, I found myself groggily waking up for some reason. The entire room was partially dark and the expectation of road lights outside my window, which illuminated the room a fair bit. I was laying on my stomach, but I felt my spine slowly bending slightly upwards, as if someone tied a rope to my legs and was slowly hoisting me up. I collected myself fully, coming out of my sleep state to notice my leg was actually being pulled up into the air. Then my leg just dropped back down to the bed as goosebumps echoed throughout my body. I quickly sat up and scanned the room, allowing my eyes to adjust to the dark. At first, I figured it was one of my 3 roommates who were playing a joke on me because I was the new guy, but they were all asleep in their areas of the room. I felt uneasy as that was the most bizarre thing to ever happen to me in my entire life. I was about to get out of bed to wake up one of the guys to tell them about my experience. Then I saw them. Now, our room door was one of those classroom-type doors with a narrow vertical rectangular-shaped window. Outside of this door window was the dorm hallway, which was also dark, but the red glow to the exit sign outside in the hallway illuminated two men. They were silhouettes. These two men appeared to be having some sort of discussion because they were moving slowly, expressing with their hands the way some people do throughout a conversation. However, there was no tone that I could hear, not even a whisper. It was absolutely silent, but they were having a flat-out silent conversation. My skeptical mind figured it was guys from another room, and they were responsible for lifting my legs. And now they were planning whatever else they can do to screw with me or my roommates. Well, the joke's on them because I'm about to sneak over to the door and catch them in the act and put an end to this nonsense so I can go back to sleep. I slowly got out of my bed and kept low to the floor as to not let them see me. I slowly made my way over to the still, keeping an eye on them as they continued their silent conversation. I looked over at my two roommates who were sleeping in their own beds, solidifying my suspicion of other guys in the dorm pranking us. I grabbed a hold of the door to our room, quickly stood up and flung open the door. Only when I opened it, the hallway was empty. No one was around. It was impossible for these two guys to have run down the hall back to their rooms, because I would have seen and heard them running. Besides, they couldn't possibly make it back to their rooms in time of me opening the door. I didn't know what to make of it. Just then, I felt a cold chill on the back of my neck, as if someone was standing right behind me. I froze. There was definitely someone there, breathing on my neck. Dread quickly spread through my body, and it made me angry because I hate feeling helpless. I turned around fast, expecting to confront whoever was standing behind me, but to my shock, there was nothing. Only 3 sleeping roommates, completely unaware. I closed the door, walked back to my bed, and lay down, keeping my eyes on the door. The 2 men I had seen before were gone. No more silhouettes. Nothing. I honestly don't know what happened that night. Even now, as I tell the story, I'm still trying to figure it out. Was I half asleep the entire time? Did thinking about Gavin's story mess with my mind to the point where I started hallucinating? The brain is incredibly powerful, and it can make you feel, see, hear, and smell things if you focus hard enough. I could convince myself of that explanation, but the thing is, I got out of bed, walked over to the door, and watched those silhouetted men the entire time as they had their silent conversation. I was fully awake, but I still don't know what I experienced. Since then, I've kept an open mind about the unknown, and I've had other strange experiences in life, but those are stories for another time. So, to the silhouetted men, why did you lift my legs so high in the air? What were you doing? And what were you talking about at 3 a.m., right outside my dorm? I guess I'll never know. In 2007, my single mom began dating a man who lived in a campground, and we, my older brother, mom, and I moved in with him. This particular campground wasn't just for seasonal campers. While most campgrounds are only for temporary stays, this one had a large section for campers and a row of trailers that people lived in year-round. Most of the trailers were occupied by elderly folks who wanted to live cheaply and enjoy the outdoors, and there was only one other family with kids around my age. The off-seasons were lonely, with no families around, but during the summer, it was a different story. Many families would visit, giving me a chance to make new friends and reconnect with those who came year after year. Summers were a lot of fun. There was a big pool, a pavilion for parties, and plenty of new faces as people came and went. But the influx of strangers made my mom uneasy. She often told me that not all grown-ups were nice, especially the ones who were drinking. Thankfully, in the 7 years we lived there, I never really had any major issues. Sure, there were a few oddballs and more drunks than I could count, but most people were either nice or kept to themselves. One summer, however, a rumor started circulating among the kids in the campground. I heard that an elderly couple had been caught multiple times staring into windows, following people around at night, and even walking in on people using the public showers. At first, I didn't take this too seriously. Kids love to tell scary stories, and I hadn't personally encountered any creepy old folks. But somehow, the rumors reached my mom, and she started reminding me to always close my blinds at night. So, I began taking it seriously too until the nights became unbearably hot. I started leaving my window and blinds open to let cooler air into my room. I went a few days without any strange encounters, so I convinced myself the rumors were just that. Rumors. But one night, as I lay in bed playing my DS and watching old Disney Channel sitcoms around 1 a.m., I started hearing rustling outside. It wasn't unusual, since we had outside cats that liked to play in the leaves, and deer, raccoons, and other animals often passed through the yard. When you live in the country, the nights can be as lively as the days, thanks to wildlife. But this rustling sounded louder than usual. It wasn't the usual light footfalls of an animal. My bed was right in front of my window, so I would have had to turn completely around to look outside. But I was too tired to bother, even if it meant catching a glimpse of a coyote or something. After a while, the noise stopped, and I forgot about it, returning to my game. But about 15 minutes later, I heard something strange, like a fingernail scratching against the mesh screen of my window. I immediately started to feel anxious. The cats couldn't reach my window, and no wild animal would care to come that close to a bright window. Instinctively, I turned around to see what made the noise. Right outside my window was an elderly man, wide eyes and a big toothless grin, face practically pressed against my window. His expression wasn't at all what I would have expected. He looked so genuinely happy to see me, as if he had been waiting all that time for me to turn around and notice him. Instead of screaming for my mom or my brother, I froze up, just staring at this face in my window for what felt like minutes, but was probably more like seconds, before I grabbed the blind's rod and rapidly twisted it, closing my blinds and throwing my blankets over my head. I remember trying to take shallow breaths as though I were afraid he would hear me despite already having seen me. I tried to convince myself it was just a hallucination or maybe even my own reflection distorted, but I knew that what I saw was real. He was inches away from me, separated only by a thin mesh screen. At some point, I must have fallen asleep because as soon as I woke up, I rushed to tell my mom what happened. She immediately called the campground's owners, who were pretty close friends of ours, and they informed us that the old man, along with his wife, had already been kicked out. Apparently, after I closed my blinds and shut him out, the old man went to another trailer with an open window, one belonging to one of my neighbors who was also still awake. She called the campground owners, who immediately called the cops, and they evicted him along with his wife, who was apparently making her rounds peering into the windows of the campers up front. They had been doing this for over a week, and finally had been caught. To this day, I'm not really sure what their motives were. Regardless, this event shook me quite a bit, and it was a long time before I was comfortable even having my blinds open whatsoever. I was more than willing to suffocate in the summer heat if it meant not risking being spied on again. I lived in that campground for 7 years, and my childhood was certainly interesting due to it. But the voyeuristic couple who came to visit in the summer of 2008 definitely changed my perspective. I was about 12 years old, playing with those huge, old-fashioned walkie-talkies from the 70s. It was summer, and I was with my brother and 3 friends. Out of nowhere, a stranger's voice came through the walkie-talkies, talking to us. At first, we thought it was just some guy nearby messing with us, but his voice was calm, too calm, and his words were so chilling that even now, it still gives me goosebumps. I tried to convince myself it was just a sick joke, maybe a prank from an older kid or something. But no, it was a grown man, not a kid or young adult. He knew way too much about us. He started describing what we were wearing, where we lived, and even threatened to kill us all. He talked about things like what my friend had worn the day before, things he couldn't have known unless he had been watching us. He spoke in a flat, serious tone, like he was completely calm and in control. No laughs, no, "I'm just trying to scare these kids" kind of vibe. He was methodical and precise. He not only knew our names and where we lived, but he also knew small details that made it clear he had been watching us for a while. He even knew when we'd last played basketball and who we were with. He knew about our last swimming trip and that my buddy loved orange creamsicles. Whenever we went to the corner store, he'd grab one, and the man knew that too. Here's the thing. These areas weren't close enough to each other for him to have just stumbled upon us. To know all these things, he would have had to be following us. He had been watching us, and he was aware of every little thing, especially about the youngest of us, Billy. He knew Billy's routines, even the random, private moments we had outdoors, away from parents or anyone else. But it wasn't even the things he knew that terrified me. It was the way he spoke. It was like listening to a recording of the Zodiac Killer's phone calls. That same calm, unnerving tone. Then, just like that, he stopped. No goodbye. No see you soon. Just silence. We tried to get him to talk again, asking who he was, pretending to be brave, but he didn't respond. Eventually, we stopped hearing anything from him at all. That night, we all stayed at my house, too freaked out to sleep, and on a dare, we turned the walkie-talkies back on a couple of hours later. We didn't speak into them, just listened. It was completely quiet, except for occasional sounds he wanted us to hear. Every 10 minutes or so, we'd hear the sound of footsteps, or a creepy whistle, or what sounded like knives being sharpened, rubbing against each other. After about an hour of listening to those eerie bursts, we heard him stop mid-transmission. He spoke again, saying, "It won't be tonight. You can all go to bed now. Smart to stick together. Smart." Then, just like that, it was over. Never another direct transmission, but we thought we heard similar random sounds. About 3 days later, a 5-minute burst of a chair rocking or wood creaking or something. Adults got home about an hour after that, and we explained it all. They took it as some asshole messing around, basically saying, "Relax, you're fine, go to bed." But it really messed with our heads. I think they thought we were exaggerating. Something on a deep level was very disturbing about it. It wasn't kids being scared of the boogeyman. It was my first taste of what I'd call real sickness. I've dreamt about it a couple times this year alone. Dozens over the years. His vocal demeanor was worse than what he said. How he would kill us as the others watched and nobody would find us. And depending on how good we were, he would decide if he'd go back to get others in our family and around the neighborhood. Specific creepy stuff, but told in a terrifyingly relaxed monotone. Horrible stuff he would say, but that tone, man. I hate to play off that as anything but a sick guy being sick and messing with us. But a couple years after a young boy did die nearby, he suddenly couldn't be found, and then he was found nearby a couple hours later. About a decade after that, another kid around the same age was horribly murdered, and it's never been solved. It made the national news. No connection other than the town and general area, but it leaves very little doubt in my mind. I told the police this story in hopes it narrowed the location of a suspect or place to look for one. You really had to hear his voice and what he said, as he knows who you are. But you have no idea who it is. Zero idea. Felt like a guy being honest. It's just how it felt then, and now you had to be there. This happened last year between Christmas and New Year's Eve. I'm from the French Caribbean, so it's not unusual to go scuba diving during the holiday season. My family and I had booked several dives, and they are all much more experienced divers than I am. They've completed advanced diving certifications that allow them to take part in more technical dives, which I'm not yet allowed to do. I enjoy scuba diving and am comfortable with almost every casual dive, but I don't yet feel safe diving without an instructor, especially if the dive requires decompression stops. For those unfamiliar with scuba diving, here's a quick explanation. You can dive to a certain depth without much risk, but if you go deeper than roughly 20 meters, 65 feet, decompression stops are required on your ascent. Decompression stops are necessary to let your body adjust to the pressure changes as you rise to the surface. If you ascend too quickly, you could develop decompression sickness, which in severe cases can be fatal. So, we decided that I would take a private lesson with an instructor to brush up on my skills before joining my family for the more exciting dives. On the first day, my family went to a technical dive site that I wasn't comfortable with yet, while I stayed behind with my instructor to get my diving reflexes back. Everything went smoothly. We were diving on a beautiful coral reef, and the boat had many beginners, with me being the most experienced diver. Eventually, my instructor decided to pair me with another student, a true beginner. After a quick briefing on safety rules and hand signals, the only way to communicate underwater, we started our descent. I quickly regained my confidence and enjoyed swimming back and forth between my instructor and the beginner diver for about 20 minutes. Everything was perfect except for one thing. It was a windy day, and there was a heavy swell. Underwater, this isn't a huge issue, but it does require more physical effort to swim, which meant my air tank was depleting faster than usual. This is normal, so I signaled to my instructor that I was running low on air, and he nodded in acknowledgement. At this point, I noticed a young man swimming toward me. He wasn't the instructor or the other student, and I didn't recognize him. But he was in full scuba gear, and since we were the only dive boat in the area, I assumed he was part of our group and I had just missed seeing him on the boat. He swam quickly toward me and signaled that he was out of air. When an air failure happens, there is a strict procedure you must follow. You have to help the person immediately, no questions asked, because every second counts. You're equipped with 2 breathing devices, your main regulator and a spare one, often called the octopus. I handed the man my spare device, meaning we were both sharing my gear, and we were now consuming air at twice the normal rate. I waited until he seemed to calm down and tried to signal for him to go to my instructor, but he shook his head no and signaled for me to start ascending. I understood this as part of the emergency procedure. My air was running low, but I was above the decompression stop depth, so the correct course of action was to ascend to the surface before I ran out of air. I wanted to inform my instructor first, but the man was very insistent that we ascend right away, which struck me as odd since it would have taken us only about 30 seconds to tell him and begin the ascent together. At this point, I was getting anxious as I watched my air level drop. I saw my instructor looking at us, confused, and swimming toward us. Just as he was approaching, the man suddenly released my spare air device and began swimming away, breathing from his own regulator once again. I was totally lost and started my ascent with my instructor. Once at the surface, because of the tides, I was feeling dizzy and nauseous, so my bizarre encounter wasn't the first thing that I debriefed. It was after I calmed down and the boat driving us towards the beach without the strange guy that I asked my instructor about what happened. I don't know. Maybe a guy lost his group and needed some time to calm down. I replied, okay, but why did he tell me that he was out of air? My instructor told me that I probably misunderstood his hand signing, that he was probably not telling me he was having an air failure because he left breathing in his own device. I'm sure I saw him do the air failure sign, but okay. The next day, I joined my family during my dive and the instructor was different. It was a girl this time named Charlie. I have had time to think about that guy and I was worried about him. So I told everything that happened to Charlie and asked her if she knew the guy and if he was okay because I never saw him return to the surface. She asked me to describe him, which I did. And she said, oh, that's just Marvin. Don't worry about him. He's preparing himself to become a scuba diving instructor. Every time he has a day off from the restaurant he's working in, he asks us to take him to the coral reef in the mornings and pick him up in the afternoon. I ate at his restaurant that afternoon and saw him. Don't worry. I was feeling relieved and told myself that it was just a comprehension issue with Marvin. The rest of the week went without any incident. I was doing more and more technical dives and everything went very smoothly. Charlie was a wonderful instructor. Never saw Marvin again. That being said, until the last dive. It was on New Year's Eve. We planned the best dive on that day. It was on a shipwreck and I felt trained enough to try it without any instructor, just my family and I. It was fairly deep for a beginner like myself, 30 meters at its down point, around 98 feet. My first day male instructor was there and told us that he would be exploring the shipwreck too, so we would cross him, and he would help me if he saw that I needed it. It was very comforting to know, and my family felt comforted too when I told them that. So we began our descent and started swimming around the shipwreck. We crossed our old instructor twice, but every time, I assigned him that everything was okay. It was at that moment that I saw Marvin swimming towards me. At this moment, I was about 5 to 10 meters above my down point, still staying under decompression stop level though. I was a little surprised and even more surprised when he signed me again that he was out of air. I was mistrustful, but if there was any chance that it would be true, I couldn't not help him. So I handed him my spare breather. This time, I had a lot of air left, so it wasn't a problem. He took it and started breathing it in and took my arm. I reached over to see his air-level instruments, but he prevented me from seeing it. Then, he signed me to start an ascent with him. I immediately signed. No, I wasn't at my deepest when he reached, but I have been deeper during this time and I had a decompression stop to do. I saw that my father saw us, but he quickly looked away, probably not understanding what was going on. I tapped at my diving computer, a device which calculates when and how long to decompress to signify it to him. He shrugged, smiled at me, and started swimming up, still holding me. I was paralyzed for a few seconds, and the thing that helped me react was that my diving computer was telling me to stop and decompress now. I then understood that I was in danger, that if I let him do what he wanted, I would die from the bends. I then started screaming only to remember that no noise can be heard underwater. I started wriggling frantically as I saw my father and sisters way below me, my diving computer alerting me more and more intensely. At that moment, my father saw us and he reacted. He swam very quickly towards us, and I managed to hit the guy as my dad grabbed my ankle and suddenly dragged me deeper. The guy then quickly swam away. My dad dragged me deeper again, and then we waited for a very long decompression stop to ensure that I was okay. Then started heading towards the surface very slowly and cautiously. On the surface, I started crying frantically and went back to the boat. My father then told me that he thought Marvin was my old instructor, and this was why he wasn't surprised at first. I then told this to my old instructor, who took it more seriously this time, and told me to point out Marvin when he returned to the surface. The thing is, he never did. The next day, on New Year, we went one last time to the scuba diving club because my little sisters had a diploma to collect, and we saw Charlie. Still rattled, I told her what happened with Marvin. And then, she told me that Marvin was at the restaurant yesterday for New Year's Eve, and he did not want to go scuba diving, which means that this guy was not Marvin. And to this day, I still have no idea who it was and what he wanted, what he was doing, and why he tried to kill me maybe twice. The key card slid into the slot with a soft click, but the lock remained stubbornly still. I frowned, trying again. Nothing. I glanced at the room number, 314. This was definitely the right door, so why wasn't it opening? I hadn't wanted to stay at this hotel. The neon sign buzzed ominously as I pulled into the lot, and the building looked like it hadn't been painted in years. But it was late, I was exhausted, and the nearest town was miles away. I just needed somewhere to sleep. Now, standing in the dim corridor with my suitcase at my feet, I started to regret my choice. I tried the key card once more before giving up and heading back to the front desk. The lobby was empty except for the night clerk, a young man with dark circles under his eyes and a grin that seemed a bit too wide. "Excuse me," I said, approaching the desk. "I'm having trouble with my key card. Room 314? His smile faltered for a moment as he typed into his computer, his brow furrowing. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I don't show anyone has checked into room 314. I blinked, bewildered. That can't be right. I just checked in an hour ago. You gave me the key yourself." He shook his head slowly. "I'm afraid that's not possible. I've been here all night, and I haven't checked anyone in." A cold wave of unease swept over me. I fumbled for the paper slip that held my key card. "Look," I said, pushing it across the desk. "Room 314. You wrote it right here." The clerk examined the slip, his frown deepening. "Ma'am, I don't recognize this handwriting, and we don't even use this kind of key card anymore." He held it up, and I noticed it was indeed different from the modern cards he had been handling earlier. My mind raced. "I don't understand. I was just in that room. My things are there." "Let's go take a look," he suggested, his tone almost too calm. I followed him up to the third floor, my unease growing with every step. When we reached room 314, the clerk used his master key to unlock the door. I rushed inside, expecting to see my suitcase on the bed, my jacket thrown over the chair, but instead, the room was pristine, perfectly made up, as if no one had ever stepped foot inside. This is impossible, I whispered, my voice trembling. My things were here. I unpacked. I took a shower. The clerk watched me with a mixture of concern and doubt. Ma'am, are you sure you're feeling all right? Maybe you're confused about which hotel you're staying at. I shook my head fiercely. No, I'm not confused. I know I checked in here. I spoke to you. But even as I said it, doubt began to creep in. The clerk's face showed no recognition, no hint that he remembered our earlier interaction. Was it possible I had imagined the whole thing? I think perhaps you should sit down, the clerk said gently. Would you like me to call someone for you? I sank onto the bed, my mind reeling. No, I just need a minute to think. The clerk nodded and retreated, leaving me alone in the room that should have been mine, but clearly wasn't. I tried to retrace my steps to make sense of what was happening. I remembered driving up to the hotel, checking in, coming to this very room. I could picture myself unpacking, taking a quick shower, lying down on the bed for just a moment. And then what? My memories became hazy after that. Had I fallen asleep? Sleepwalked somehow? But that didn't explain why my belongings were missing or why the clerk had no record of me. I pulled out my phone, thinking I could check my bank statement for the hotel charge, but my screen remained stubbornly black. Dead battery, of course. With shaking hands, I opened the nightstand drawer, looking for the usual hotel directory. Instead, I found a small notebook. Curious, I opened it. The pages were filled with handwritten notes. The ink faded, and the paper yellowed with age. I squinted, trying to make out the words in the dim light. Day 47. Another guest vanished last night. That makes 3 this month. The others don't seem to notice, or maybe they do, and they're just too afraid to say anything. I don't know how much longer I can keep working here, but I'm afraid of what might happen if I try to leave. My blood ran cold. I flipped through more pages, each entry more disturbing than the last. Stories of guests checking in and never checking out, of room numbers changing overnight, of staff members disappearing without a trace. The final entry caught my eye. If you're reading this, you're in danger. Get out now. Don't trust anyone. They won't let you leave if they know you've figured it out. I slammed the notebook shut, my heart pounding. This had to be some kind of joke, right? A prank to scare guests? But the tremor in my hands and the knot in my stomach told me this was all too real. I needed to get out of here now. I crept to the door, pressing my ear against it. The hallway beyond was silent. Slowly, carefully, I turned the handle and peeked out. Empty. I slipped into the corridor, my bare feet silent on the worn carpet. I had no idea where my shoes were, but I wasn't about to go looking for them now. As I crept toward the stairs, a door opened behind me. I froze, not daring to look back. Can I help you, ma'am? It was the clerk's voice, but something about it had changed. It was colder, harder. I ran. I hit the stairwell at full speed, taking the steps 2 at a time. I could hear footsteps behind me, faster than they should be. Inhuman, I burst into the lobby, gasping for breath. It looked different somehow, the furniture older, the wallpaper faded and peeling, and it was empty. No late-night guests, no staff, just me and the sound of those relentless footsteps getting closer. I sprinted for the front door, my lungs burning. Almost there. I reached for the handle, yanked. It didn't budge. No, no, no. I moaned, pulling harder. The door remained stubbornly shut, as if it had been painted closed. I spun around looking for another exit and froze. The clerk stood there, but he wasn't the young man I'd seen earlier. His skin was gray and sagging, his eyes sunken and lifeless. When he smiled, his teeth were sharp and yellow. Leaving so soon? He asked, his voice a raspy whisper. But you've only just checked in? I backed away, my shoulders hitting the immovable door. What do you want from me? He tilted his head, regarding me with those dead eyes. Want? Oh, my dear, we don't want anything from you. We just want you to stay. Forever. As he spoke, more figures emerged from the shadows, staff members, guests, all with that same gray skin, those same lifeless eyes. They moved towards me slowly, inexorably, like a tide of death. I screamed, pounding on the door behind me. Help! Somebody help me! But there was no one to hear, no one to help. I was alone in a hotel that didn't exist, surrounded by people who weren't people at all. The clerk reached for me, his cold fingers brushing my arm. I recoiled, squeezing my eyes shut, bracing for whatever was coming. And then suddenly I woke up. I shot upright, gasping for air. I was in a bed, my bed, in my apartment. Sunlight poured in through the window, and the familiar sounds of traffic drifted in from outside. It had all been a dream, a terrifyingly vivid nightmare, but a dream nonetheless. I let out a shaky laugh, running a hand through my damp hair. Of course, it wasn't real. Vanishing hotel rooms, undead staff. It was ludicrous. Yet, as I began getting ready for the day, that uneasy feeling wouldn't leave me. The dream had felt so real. Every detail was sharp and clear, etched in my mind. It wasn't until I started dressing that I saw something strange. On my nightstand sat a small, worn notebook. My heart stopped as I picked it up with shaky hands and opened it to the first page. Day 1. I finally escaped. But I don't think I'm really free. They'll find me eventually. They always do. If you're reading this, be careful. Don't check in. Once they have you, they'll never let you go. I dropped the notebook, my mind spinning. Couldn't be possible. Couldn't be real. But as I looked around my room, familiar yet different, I noticed small things that weren't quite right. The wallpaper pattern didn't quite match how I remembered it. The view outside the window was just slightly off. And there, on my dresser, was a key card for room 314. I collapsed to the floor, the awful truth settling in. I hadn't escaped at all. The hotel had simply altered its appearance, lulling me into a false sense of safety. But now I understood. I was still checked in, and I would be forever. This story took place last winter. I work as a chef at a hotel in the UK, located in a very remote area, which means they offer staff accommodation. We often have people from overseas come here to gain work experience as well. Since most of the staff staying in the accommodation are quite young, it's common for there to be a lot of parties. One night, after a long shift, my friend AJ and I decided to skip the parties and just have a few beers in my room instead. We started talking about the day's events, and as the night went on, the conversation turned to paranormal experiences. AJ, who's from Mexico, began sharing some stories from his hometown, and I learned that he used to be an urban explorer, visiting abandoned places and documenting them. That's when he brought up Randonautica. For those unfamiliar, Randonautica is an app that takes your GPS coordinates and generates random nearby locations for you to explore. I had no idea at that point that there were some genuinely creepy stories associated with the app, and I definitely advise against using it at night. But since we had a few drinks, and AJ already had the app on his phone, we thought it'd be fun to take a walk and check out the spot Randonautica chose. The app prompts you to set an intention, like searching for something frightening or unexpected. With it being close to 2 a.m., we of course decided to aim for something scary. The app gave us 3 nearby locations to choose from. Since neither of us had a car, we went with the closest one. As I mentioned, we live in a hotel that's surrounded by woods and fields, so this meant walking down dark back roads with nothing but our phone flashlights to guide us. As we began walking, everything around us felt amplified. The wind howling through the trees, the animals rustling in the bushes. We went down a hill near the hotel, and at the bottom, we saw some traffic lights casting a faint glow ahead of us. We were chatting and feeling lighthearted, maybe still a little tipsy from the beers. But as we got closer to the location, I started feeling uneasy. We crossed into a field, and that's when things began to take a strange turn. Our path was blocked off by some gates. The gates were padlocked shut, but they were small enough to climb over. The location was past the gates, through the field, and off to the left-hand side. I looked at AJ and suggested we head back, but we both came to the mutual agreement that we had come too far to just turn and walk away. We both jumped over the gate and started walking through the muddy field. Now it was really dark. The moon had gone behind some clouds and it seemed to get colder. It was nearing 3 a.m. We both pointed our torches in the way the app was telling us to go, and suddenly we could see what looked like an old storage container just sat there in the middle of the field. Is that it? I asked. No, said AJ, it's over in that direction, and pointed to his left. We both continued to walk towards the storage container though. Don't ask me why, I think it was just out of curiosity. We both stopped at exactly the same time. Our torch lights lit up the front of the container. There someone had spray painted a clown, a sinister-looking clown. I was frozen. If we had stumbled across this during the day, it would have been scary enough, let alone at 3 o'clock in the morning when we were walking towards the unknown. AJ broke the silence by letting out a nervous laugh. It's just a clown, bro. I just looked at him. Yeah, mate. It's just a clown spray painted on a random storage container in a random field with no one around for miles. After a few seconds, he said, let's keep walking. At this point, the hair on the back of my neck was standing on end. Something really didn't feel right. I'm not actually scared of clowns. It's just I really didn't expect to see that, and something was off. It's just over there. Bro, he said, pointing at a tree line. Absolutely not, I thought to myself. Not a chance am I walking up to those trees. It was the start of a vast forest that ended at the hotel nearly 2 miles away. I am not running through the forest and getting lost if there's something out there waiting for us, I said in a shaky voice. Again, we both came to an agreement not to turn back. We edged closer towards the forest until we could see a little opening. It's in there, he said. I looked and started walking faster towards it. I didn't want this to be drawn out any more than it had to be. Something stopped me in my tracks. My blood ran cold. We were on the tree line at this point, and through the trees I saw a light. Someone or something else was there. I knew where that light was. It was in the pinpointed location. I turned for what only could have been a split second to tell AJ we were in danger when we heard it. Twigs and branches breaking. Whatever it was moving closer. I looked back even though I knew I shouldn't have, and a tall black figure was standing in between 2 large oaks. I didn't get a better look. Couldn't. My legs just geared up and I ran. I ran without looking back. Me and AJ were sprinting now, faster than we ever had before. We didn't even know what direction we were heading in. We didn't know how far we ran until we saw that illuminating glow of the traffic lights. We both slowed down, panting and spluttering. It felt like my throat was bleeding as the cold night air hit my face while running, and through gasping breaths had cut my windpipes like glass. We looked around and couldn't see anything. I think we're in the clear, AJ said through staggering breaths. We walked quickly up the hill towards the hotel. I have never been so happy to see the lights in my entire life. This is a warning, never download Randonautica, and if you ever do, only use it in the day. Later it came to my attention that people have gone to locations only to find dead bodies, and some people say it's associated with the dark web. I don't know what that thing was or who they were. I guess I never will. What makes this story more scary, I don't think it was paranormal. I think it was a human, lurking in the trees, waiting for us. This happened in late October of last year in Ottawa, Ontario. I was back in my old city visiting my parents, which is always a bit stressful. So I usually try to stay away from their house as much as possible while I'm there. To pass the time one night, I decided to go for a jog around the neighborhood I grew up in. It was around 10:30 p.m., and I was really pushing myself since I'd quit drinking and was trying hard to burn off some of the belly fat I'd gained from being lazy and drinking during lockdown. I ran a huge circuit around the neighborhood, passing through 3 parks along the way. The third park I ran through is totally dark at night. There's one streetlight in the middle, but Ottawa has this thing where random streetlights go out across the city to save electricity, and this one is usually off. The park is pitch black, especially on a quiet October night with clear skies and dry ground. The road leading into it, however, is well lit. This is a nice, quiet, peaceful suburb, but it's not without its sketchy moments. For instance, just a 6-minute walk from my parents' house, there was one of the largest drug busts the city had seen in years. Some gang with automatic weapons and the whole criminal operation. There have also been a few stabbings in other parts of the area, but they were pretty spaced out and were handled quickly by the authorities. All in all, it's a very safe, clean, and peaceful place, ideal for raising a family. If I ever have kids or retire, Canada would definitely be a place I'd consider. I've never felt unsafe, especially in the neighborhood my parents live in, which has some beautiful homes. I entered the dark park and passed through the first part, a small wooden play structure meant for young kids, next to a bouncy spring. This led into a larger part of the park with a basketball court, a jungle gym, and a bigger play structure featuring a large plastic green triceratops in a sandbox. Eventually, this path runs behind my old elementary school, which brings me to my street. I was almost done with my run, having passed through the spooky park countless times before. Lately, I've gotten into the habit of falling asleep to creepy stories, and I've been watching a lot of horror movies. As I was approaching the dark part of the park from the adjacent street, I thought about taking a break and walking, but I reminded myself I was pushing myself tonight. I kept going, joking to myself, gee, I sure hope nothing spooky happens. But as I rounded the corner to the other side of the park, I heard a distant scraping sound. I noticed a light from a cell phone shining in the sandbox. As I got closer, the scraping noise grew louder. I squinted in the moonlight and saw a man holding a hard rake with sharp tines, grooming the sandbox. Something in my gut told me this was incredibly weird. Why on earth would someone be grooming the sandbox at almost 11 p.m. with a flashlight? As I approached even closer, though, I realized it wasn't just a man holding a rake. It's a man wearing an all-black sweatsuit with the hood up and a white hospital mask. He is standing underneath the play structure, using the tines of the rake to push a pink horse with wheels on it back and forth and so on and so forth. He heard the stride of my footsteps approaching and his head jerked upright in my direction. He quickly moved out from underneath the play structure and shined the light on me right into my eyes. This is really weird, I thought to myself as I flashed him an utterly exhausted, awkward wave. I have asthma and my quads and lungs are giving out. I try super hard to up the pace because I am fairly creeped out at this point. In a flash, he kills his light, and I cannot see a single thing anymore. My heart jumps into my throat and I am very tuckered out at this point, ready to collapse. I heard a soft shuffling in the sand as I passed him, followed by rapid footsteps in between my strides getting closer and louder. Instantaneously, it clicks that this guy is charging me with the rake. It's crazy what fear and adrenaline can do because I went from 0 to a 100 real quick, sprinting faster than I would be able to normally. My whole body is burning, especially my lungs, as I cleared the park onto the well-lit path. I was moving so fast and panting so loud, I couldn't even tell if he was following me or not. I didn't look back. I cleared the end of the path and saw some guy getting out of his car. With him as my witness, I turned around, panting myself to death and wheezing. He was gone. I walked back to my street and went into my house hacking up disgusting amounts of phlegm, absolutely drenched in sweat. I avoided telling my parents this story at first just to avoid their reaction, but everyone else in my life knew pretty quick. I don't care for police, so calling them wasn't even something that crossed my mind. Later, when I reconnected with an old friend, one who never left Ottawa, she informed me that my old elementary school converts to a homeless shelter at night. They set up cots in the gymnasium and kicked them out at 6 a.m. Her reaction was to rationalize that it was probably a mentally ill homeless person who was bored and couldn't sleep. But what if he had a different intention? Was he waiting for a jogger to pass by? Was he trying to scare people just for the fun of it? Or was he really in a violent mood? I guess I will never know. My parents divorced when I was very young, and I do have some memories of their separate lives after that. They both lived in apartments somewhere in the middle of Tennessee. Not long before I was about to start kindergarten, my mom remarried my stepdad, and we moved to a small house in the middle of nowhere, Alabama, about 30 miles outside of Birmingham. It was in a good school district and close to my stepdad's family, who would help with taking care of my brand new little sister. This was a really exciting time for my other little sister and me because we finally had cousins, aunts, uncles, and grandparents nearby. Instead of only seeing family during the holidays when we traveled to New England or Florida once or twice a year, we could visit them anytime. We didn't even mind that they were all step-family. We were just happy to be surrounded by people. The cousins we saw the most were Brady and Micah. Their mom and our mom worked odd jobs to make ends meet and would help each other with childcare, while my stepdad worked as a truck driver and Uncle Randy worked as an EMT ambulance driver. Our living situation was a bit unusual. We lived in a small two-room house that was situated almost directly behind a large old farmhouse that no one lived in. Whenever Brady and Micah came to visit, we always ended up wandering through the old house and couldn't help but wonder why it was still fully furnished when no one was living there. The beds were made, and there were a few plates in the sink that had clearly been left there for years. It was as if someone had just gone to work one day and never returned. One day, after playing in the house, I found a plate in the kitchen that I thought was very pretty. I knew we were about to visit my grandparents in Florida for the summer and thought it would be the perfect gift for my grandmother, who loved collecting Southern Belle plates. I took it back home, and my mom helped me clean it up and get it ready that evening before sending me off to bed. After I was tucked in, my mom followed her usual routine of smoking a cigarette, emptying the ashtray, sweeping the porch, locking up, and then watching the nightly news before going to bed herself. But while she was in bed, she kept smelling a burning cigarette. She couldn't figure out why, so she got up to check the garbage, thinking her last cigarette might still be lit. But it wasn't, so she went back to bed. She was almost asleep, convinced the smell was just in her nose, when all the lights in her room suddenly turned on. She turned over to get out of bed, only to find me standing beside her bed, clutching my blanket and crying. She asked me why I had turned on all the lights, and I could barely get the words out through my tears. I said that I hadn't turned on any lights, not in our room, not in the living room. Carolyn did. I told my mom to stop and turn the lights off, but she just laughed. She was really confused and asked me who Carolyn was. I explained that Carolyn was my friend. Normally, she just turns on some lights at night, and she didn't have lights in her house next door until she was 6, like me, and she likes to play with them. But when I ask her to stop and go home to sleep, she always turns off the lights and leaves. But tonight, Carolyn turned on all the lights, and when I told her to stop, she laughed and walked into our closet instead of going home. And now she didn't want to leave even though I wanted her to. She had made fun of me. My mom got out of bed and picked me up. As she carried me back to my room, she quickly noticed that every light in the house, every lamp, every ceiling light, even the pool chain lamp under the kitchen counter was on. She took me to my room, laid me in bed, and checked the closet to make sure Carolyn wasn't hiding in there. After turning off the bedroom light so my sisters wouldn't wake up, she went into the hallway to turn off the light in the hall, but before she could even touch the switch, every light in the house suddenly went out. My mom thought we had lost power, so she flipped the light switch to check, and the lights came back on, just as they should have. It was strange, but she chalked it up to faulty wiring and went back to bed. As she tried to relax, the smell of cigarette smoke returned. She sat up, trying to figure out if she'd smelled it before while dealing with me, or if she had just been too distracted and freaked out to notice. While she was trying to remember, she heard the back porch screen door open and slam shut. She knew she had locked it before going to bed, so she didn't waste any time. She grabbed the phone and called Uncle Randy since this was before cell phones, and it wasn't like my stepdad would have been able to make it back from Arkansas in time for anything to happen anyway. For 12 minutes, my mom sat frozen in her bed, too scared to move, listening for any sign of an intruder or any of us waking up. Then she heard a car pull up into the driveway, followed by Randy banging on the screen door and shouting her name. She rushed to the kitchen, threw open the back door, and turned on the porch light. That's when she saw it. Between her and Randy were about 20 burnt cigarette butts and ashes scattered all over the floor, right where she had just cleaned it an hour before, and the screen door was still locked. Hey everyone. For those of you who've been following this, I'm safe but still far from being out of danger. While my neighbor and I were waiting for the situation to clear, I saw my garage door open at around 03:27 a.m. Right then, My neighbor and I bolted for his car. As we were leaving, I noticed the lights in my bathroom had turned on, and I nearly lost it realizing how easily he had gotten in, and how I'd been completely unaware just an hour earlier. I've been obsessing over how if I'd stayed in the house, my neighbors would have called to say he was in my driveway, and I would have heard the garage door open. The sheer dread of knowing I'd be totally trapped. Once we were in the car, we rushed straight to the police station. The police went through the usual questions, asking if I recognized the man, when and where we'd first crossed paths, whether I could identify his car, or if I had taken note of his license plate. I told them he had been there twice before, but it was too dark to see anything clearly, even with the street lights. When the man parked in my driveway, one of my neighbors who had been keeping watch saw that it was a gray Volkswagen, but it didn't have a license plate. She also mentioned that she saw him punch in the code to my garage, go inside, and turn on all my lights, as if he were checking out the entire house. According to her, he stayed there for about 5 minutes, got back in his car, and drove off without taking anything. She called the police right away, and they've been searching for him since. Unfortunately, they haven't found anything, and when we returned, my house was largely untouched. Oddly, though, the police didn't find any trace of DNA anywhere. Whoever this guy is, he's incredibly meticulous, and somehow he knew my garage code. It's unsettling to think that he might have been watching me when I entered it earlier this week, and I have no idea what else he might know about me. My parents still haven't come back from their trip since their flight got delayed. So, I'm still here at the hotel alone with just a bottle of Jack Daniels to keep me company. A few police cars are stationed around my house, waiting for the guy to show up. I'm not leaving this hotel until they catch him, that's for sure. I don't think I'll sleep tonight either. I'm hoping that tonight he finally loses track of me. The police have told me to stay off social media entirely to avoid giving away my location. No Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook, basically nothing. They've said I can use my laptop, but I have to keep a low profile. So all I can do now is wait for the police to call with news that they've caught the stalker. In the meantime, I'm trying to figure out who this guy could be and why he's stalking me. I have a few ideas. One possibility is my 9th grade Italian teacher. I went to a private school, and this teacher was one of the most unhinged people I've ever encountered. He was incredibly outspoken about his political views and downright mean-spirited in his teaching. He would often make fun of students, fall asleep in class, and make inappropriate comments toward the girls. One day, I decided to email the dean to report him, asking that he be removed for his unacceptable behavior. It worked, and I never saw the guy again. The reason I think this might be a possibility is that he never really liked me in the first place. In fact, I feel like he singled me out a lot and picked on me. I'm not sure if he ever found out I sent that email, but if he did, I'm really concerned. I couldn't tell for sure if it was him when he spoke in my backyard because I was in full adrenaline mode while I was yelling at him. Honestly, I wouldn't say he's the most likely suspect, but I'm just not sure. My second theory is my Christian deacon from 2nd grade. When I was in elementary school, I used to be involved in his church program. Out of all the leaders there, one who always stood out was Deacon Anthony. He was a middle-aged guy, very soft-spoken, and always seemed especially kind to me and my friend Kevin. He'd often bring us candy, ask about our home lives, and treated us better than the other kids. One day, Kevin told me that Deacon Anthony had invited him to come home with him and hang out. Kevin turned him down and told me about it, so I told my parents. They immediately got in touch with the church, and after that, I never saw Deacon Anthony again. Later, my parents told me they had contacted the church board, and he was removed from his position. If it was him, though, he must have had a drastic personality change because the cheerful way he told me to have a nice day didn't match the man I knew when I was younger. Theory 3 is my classmate Derek from 8th grade. Derek was the type who got a kick out of making others feel small. He was your typical middle school bully who deserved a good smack, which he never got. What did happen, though, was that I started a rumor about him that I really regret. Pretty much ruined his reputation and turned him into a laughingstock. But as far as I can tell, he never found out it was me. After I left for public school, I heard that the rumor had followed him to our local high school, and he became one of those quiet kids who never said much. Keep in mind, Derek had actually told my whole friend group to stop hanging out with me, so in my mind, This revenge felt justified. This could actually be the main suspect since he would definitely know where I live. I tried looking for him on social media, but found nothing. This guy is pretty much a ghost, and I have no idea what he's been up to all these years. Theory 4 is that it could be a complete stranger with no connection to me. Maybe this is just a classic old-school stalker who picks random people to target. But honestly, no one in this town has seemed particularly suspicious. The only person who stands out at all is this strange cashier at a 7-Eleven who seemed unusually enthusiastic about his job. He might have Asperger's syndrome, or maybe he just takes his work really seriously, but he was always polite to customers, especially when interacting with me. One time, I went in to grab a soda from the fountain, and the store was empty. He asked, "Is that all you're getting?" I told him, "Yeah, that's it." And he said, "Well, congratulations, it's free." I thought, sweet, a free soda? I thanked him a bunch, and he was outside smoking a cigarette when I left. He said, "Have a good one," and I went on my way. I know what you all might be thinking, this has to be the guy, right? He's a cashier after all. But honestly, I'm not sure. He was probably in his 30s, seemed pretty grateful for his low-end job, and just seemed content with his life. He didn't give off any stalker vibes. But then again, I haven't been back to that store since. Maybe he's still there, or maybe he's gone. I guess only time will tell. I might swing by that 7-Eleven tomorrow to investigate a bit more. As I'm writing this, it's 11 p.m. again, and I'm sitting here at the hotel, scrolling through Reddit. I'm still dreading the moment I see that car with flashing high beams pull into the parking lot. So I'll probably be watching my window all night. I'll post more updates if anything new happens. I appreciate you all, but for now, I'm signing off. I've been reading through all your comments, and just so you know, I can't just grab a gun like some of you think. I live in a state where that kind of stuff isn't easy to come by, and the best I've got right now is pepper spray and a baseball bat. 1:37 a.m. Call me crazy, but I couldn't stand being cooped up in this small hotel room anymore. So I went out for some fresh air, but I was freaking out, and every person I saw felt like a threat. I started talking to a guy in the hotel lobby who said he's been traveling across the country on some kind of journey. I asked him if he'd ever dealt with stalkers, and he said he'd gotten anonymous calls from some guy a few years ago. I asked if anything ever happened in his backyard, and he looked at me kind of weird. I explained my situation, and he wished me luck. It wasn't anything extraordinary, but it was nice to have some real human interaction while I'm losing my mind. 1:46 a.m. Okay, one of the janitors must be messing with me. I spent a minute looking for my phone, and then I asked someone outside my room to call it. I listened for the sound and realized it was in the fucking safe. And the password? Not the one they gave me. What the hell is going on? This is so messed up. Whoever's doing this is in for it. I'm going straight to the manager to get this figured out. 2:08 a.m. So I'm demanding a new room, guys. I'm not staying in that one more second. The whole staff is in my room now trying to figure out the safe password, and the manager's out looking for the janitors who were in there, trying to figure out what the hell they were thinking. Screw this. I'm exhausted and worried, and now I've lost my damn phone. This is insane. 2:24 a.m. Okay, so it's not the garage code. I checked. Even if it were, how the hell would the stalker even get into my hotel room, let alone mess with the safe? I'm not leaving the hotel. I've already paid for the room, and I don't have anywhere else to go that's less than 100 miles away. I don't even have a car. I took an Uber here. At least I'm in a hotel with over 100 people staying here. The stalker's not going to come into a hotel full of people, right? 2:40 a.m. I'm sitting here alone in my hotel room with no phone, no way to call an Uber, no way to contact anyone, and I'm starting to think one of the janitors was bribed to mess with me. Now, not only do I have no way to leave, but I also can't reach any family or get help to get out of here. I'm giving them 45 more minutes, and if they don't open that safe, I'm demanding they call an Uber, and I'll just drive the hell out of here. 2:53 a.m. Someone just knocked on my door saying the safe is open. I told them okay, and then they asked me to come and get it. I asked if he could slip it under the door, but he said I needed to come get it myself. I told him I'd be there in a couple of minutes, but I'm starting to get a little paranoid. Guys, 3:10 a.m. The man told me my phone's in the main lobby if I want it. I'm sitting at my laptop by the window, and I could have sworn I saw a car flashing its high beams again from the corner of my eye. I'm not sure if I should wait until morning or go get my phone and just leave. What do you guys think? 3:14 a.m. Guys, I'm not waiting until 3:24 for this guy to come into my room and jump me. I'm packing up and getting the hell out of here. I'll keep you all posted on mobile when I get my phone back. 3:16 p.m. Alright guys, I'm staying at a friend's place for now. Just to clarify, when I said there was no trace of DNA found, I meant that there was nothing left behind that could trace this guy. No gloves, no fingerprints on the garage keypad, nothing. The police didn't exactly do a full investigation, though. The guy still hasn't been found, and my neighbors told me no one's been back to my house. My parents are staying at my aunt's down south right now. I got my phone back, and there was a missed call from a guy named Nick Sullivan. What's weird is his name wasn't in my contacts. I've never met anyone named Nick Sullivan, and I have no idea how his name ended up there. I tried calling back, but it just went to voicemail. Creepy, but maybe I'm just being paranoid. I'll try to update you all again tonight, but I have to go for now. Talk to you soon. 4:35 p.m. So, the guy who called my phone wasn't the same guy as Nick Sullivan who I missed the call from. I don't know what the hell is going on, but this is getting really weird. The moment I saw his thumb sticking out on that desolate stretch of highway, I knew I should have kept driving. But I didn't, and that decision turned what should have been a routine road trip into a fight for my life. A night I'll never forget. I'm Jack, just an average guy who made one simple mistake. I picked up a hitchhiker. Sounds harmless, right? A simple, even kind thing to do, but sometimes the road to hell really is paved with good intentions. It was a crisp autumn evening, and I was heading back from a business trip in Chicago. The sun was setting, casting the sky in vibrant shades of orange and pink. I'd been on the road for hours, the monotony broken only by the occasional rest stop or small town. That's when I saw him, a solitary figure by the side of the road, thumb outstretched. He was in his mid-20s, with a scruffy beard and a worn-out backpack resting at his feet. As I got closer, he glanced up, his eyes meeting mine through the windshield. I'm not sure what prompted me to do it. Maybe it was the exhaustion in his posture, or the fading light that made me worry about him being stuck out there after dark. Whatever the reason, I found myself slowing down, pulling over just ahead of him. He jogged up to the passenger side, a grateful smile spreading across his face as I rolled down the window. "Hey, thanks for stopping," he said. "I've been out here for hours. Where are you headed?" I asked, still not entirely sure why I was doing this. "Just up to the next town, if that's all right. Name's Mike, by the way." I hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Hop in." "Mike, I'm Jack." As he climbed into the passenger seat, I caught a faint scent of cigarette smoke and something else. Something I couldn't quite identify. He tossed his backpack into the back seat, and I pulled back onto the highway. For the first few miles, we made small talk. He mentioned he was a freelance photographer, traveling the country for work. I talked a bit about my job in sales, my family back home. It was casual, ordinary, nothing out of the ordinary. But then I noticed something. Every time I mentioned my home, my family, Mike would subtly tense up. His responses got shorter, and his gaze was fixed firmly ahead, his hands gripping the seat a little too tightly. "You okay?" I asked, glancing over at him. He startled slightly, then forced a smile. "Yeah, just tired. Been a long day, you know?" I nodded, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The easy rapport we'd had earlier was gone, replaced by a tension I couldn't quite explain. As we drove on, the sun dipped below the horizon, plunging the world into twilight. The highway stretched out before us, empty, save for the occasional passing car. That's when Mike spoke up again. "Am I mind if we take a little detour?" he asked, his voice casual but with an undercurrent of something. "There's a scenic overlook just off the next exit. Great place to stretch our legs." I hesitated. We were in the middle of nowhere, and the idea of pulling off onto some dark side road with a stranger suddenly seemed like a very bad idea. I don't know, I said slowly. It's getting pretty late. I should really keep going. Mike's demeanor changed in an instant. The friendly facade dropped away, replaced by a cold, hard stare. That wasn't a request, he said, reaching into his jacket and pulling out a wicked-looking knife. Take the next exit. Now, my heart leaped into my throat, my hands tightening on the steering wheel. This couldn't be happening. It was like something out of a movie, not real life. Look, Mike, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. You don't want to do this. Whatever's going on, we can figure it out. Just put the knife away and shut up and drive. He snarled, the blade now pressed against my ribs. Next exit, or things are going to get really unpleasant. With no choice, I took the exit. The road quickly became narrow and winding, leading us deeper into the dark countryside. My mind raced, trying to figure a way out of this nightmare. Pull over here, Mike ordered as we reached a clearing overlooking a steep ravine. I did as he said, my palms sweaty on the wheel. As soon as the car stopped, Mike grabbed my keys from the ignition. Get out, he said, gesturing with the knife. And don't try anything stupid. We both got out of the car, Mike keeping the knife trained on me as he moved around to the driver's side. Okay, Jack, he said, a cruel smile twisting his features. Here's how this is going to go. You're going to give me your wallet, your watch, and your phone. Then you're going to start walking down that road. Don't look back. Don't try to follow me. If you're lucky, someone will pick you up before you freeze. Please, I said, my voice shaking. You don't have to do this. Just take the car and go. I won't report it, I swear. Mike laughed. A harsh, humorless sound. Nice try, but I can't take that chance. Now hand over your stuff. I won't ask again. Slowly, I reached for my wallet. But as I pulled it out, I let it drop to the ground. It was a desperate move, but it worked. Mike's eyes flicked down for just a second. In that moment, I lunged. We went down in a tangle of limbs, grappling for control of the knife. Mike was stronger than he looked, but I had the advantage of surprise and desperation. We rolled across the gravel, dangerously close to the edge of the ravine. I managed to get on top, pinning Mike's knife hand to the ground, but he wasn't done. With his free hand, he grabbed a fistful of gravel and flung it into my eyes. Blinded and in pain, I reeled back. I felt the knife slash across my arm, hot blood spilling down my sleeve. Mike shoved me hard, and suddenly there was nothing beneath me but air. I tumbled down the steep slope, branches and rocks tearing at my clothes and skin. When I finally came to a stop at the bottom, every inch of me ached. But I was alive. Above, I could hear Mike cursing. The beam of a flashlight swept over me, and I pressed myself against the ground, hardly daring to breathe. After what felt like an eternity, I heard the car door slam and the engine roar to life. As the sound of my car faded into the distance, I allowed myself to assess the damage. The cut on my arm was painful but not too deep. Nothing felt broken, though I was sure I'd be one giant bruise come morning. Slowly, painfully, I began to climb back up the slope. It was slow going in the dark, my hands scrabbling for purchase on loose rocks and exposed roots. By the time I reached the top, I was exhausted and shaking. The clearing was empty now. No sign of Mike or my car. I was alone in the middle of nowhere, with no phone and no idea which way the nearest town might be. For a moment, despair threatened to overwhelm me. But then I remembered my family, waiting for me back home. I couldn't give up. I had to find help. I chose a direction and started walking, my arm cradled against my chest. The night was cold, and I shivered in my thin jacket. But I kept moving, one foot in front of the other. I don't know how long I walked. Hours, probably. The moon rose, casting just enough light to keep me from stumbling off the road. Every car that passed, I tried to flag down, but they were few and far between on this desolate stretch, and none of them stopped. Just when I thought I couldn't take another step, I saw lights in the distance. As I got closer, I realized it was a small gas station, a beacon of hope in the dark. I stumbled into the fluorescent-lit store, startling the sleepy clerk behind the counter. Please, I gasped. I need help. I need to call the police. What happened next was a blur of police statements, paramedics checking me over, frantic calls to my family. Mike and my car were long gone, but the police issued an APB. As I sat in the back of an ambulance, a shock blanket draped over my shoulders. The full weight of what had happened began to sink in. I had nearly died, all because I made the mistake of picking up a hitchhiker. In the weeks that followed, I jumped at every shadow and flinched at every unexpected sound. I couldn't drive for months without having a panic attack. The physical wounds healed, but the psychological scars ran deep. They never caught Mike. Sometimes I wonder where he is now. If he's still out there, hitching rides along some lonely highway, waiting for another well-meaning stranger to make the same mistake I did. I've learned my lesson. No more picking up hitchhikers, no matter how harmless they might seem. Because you never know who's hiding behind a friendly smile and a sob story. Now, when I drive that stretch of highway, I keep my eyes fixed straight ahead. And if I see a figure on the side of the road, thumb outstretched, I press the gas pedal just a little harder and offer a silent prayer for whoever might stop next. Because sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone to let their guard down. The trail had vanished into the forest over an hour ago, but I kept pressing forward. As the sun sank below the treetops, casting elongated shadows across the unfamiliar landscape, it hit me. I was completely lost. That's when I saw it. A faint glimmer of light ahead, offering the promise of shelter from the deepening darkness. Little did I know, I was walking directly into a nightmare. My boots crunched against the carpet of pine needles as I moved toward the light. The day had begun so perfectly. Clear skies, a well-marked trail, and the anticipation of stunning views at the peak. I convinced myself that this solo hike was exactly what I needed to clear my mind after weeks of work stress. Now, as the temperature dropped and the forest grew darker, I cursed my own arrogance. Hours ago, I had strayed from the main trail, thinking I'd found a shortcut. By the time I realized my mistake, the familiar markers had vanished, replaced by dense brush and towering trees, all blending together in the dimming light. My phone had lost signal long ago, rendering the map app useless. I was completely on my own. The light grew brighter as I neared, and through the trees, I made out the shape of a small cabin sitting in a clearing. A wave of relief washed over me. Even if no one was inside, it would offer shelter for the night. I could figure out my way back in the morning. As I moved closer, more details became clear. The cabin was old, its wooden walls weathered and gray. A small porch sagged under the weight of time, but warm light spilled from the windows, and I could see smoke rising from the chimney. Someone was definitely home. I hesitated at the edge of the clearing, suddenly unsure. There was something about the scene that felt off, though I couldn't quite pinpoint what it was. Maybe it was the eerie silence. No birds, no insects, not even the faintest rustle of wind through the trees. Or perhaps it was the way the light flickered and danced from the window, as though it were from a fire instead of electric bulbs. My instincts screamed at me, but my need for shelter pushed me forward. In the end, desperation won. I took a deep breath and stepped into the clearing, heading toward the front door. The porch creaked ominously under my weight as I raised my hand to knock. Before my knuckles could touch the wood, the door swung open. A man stood there, backlit by the warm glow from inside. He was tall and lean, with a scraggly beard and piercing eyes that seemed to look right through me. "Well now," he said, his voice rough as if from disuse. "What brings you to our neck of the woods?" I swallowed hard, fighting down a surge of unease. "I'm sorry to bother you," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I got lost on the trail and saw your light. I was hoping I could use your phone to call for help, or maybe get directions back to the main road." The man's eyes narrowed slightly, but then his face broke into a wide grin. Of course. Can't leave a fellow traveler out in the cold. Come on in." He stepped back, gesturing for me to enter. I hesitated for a moment, then stepped over the threshold. The interior of the cabin was sparse, but cozy, dominated by a large fireplace where flames danced merrily. A few pieces of rustic furniture were scattered around, and I could see a small kitchenette in one corner. "Have a seat," the man said, pointing to a worn armchair near the fire. "Warm yourself up. I'll see about that phone for you." I sank into the chair gratefully, feeling the heat from the fire chase away the chill that had settled into my bones. As the man disappeared into another room, I took the opportunity to look around more closely. Something felt off about the cabin's interior, but I couldn't quite put my finger on what. The furnishings looked old, almost antique, but well maintained. There were no personal touches though, no photos, no knickknacks, nothing to suggest someone actually lived here. My eyes fell on a small table near the door. A collection of odd items was spread across its surface: a tarnished pocket watch, a handful of what looked like old coins, a smudged pair of glasses. They looked like the sort of things you'd find in the pockets of a chill ran down my spine, one that had nothing to do with the cool night air outside. These were personal effects, but they didn't belong to the cabin's owner. They were trophies. The sound of footsteps made me turn. The man had returned, but he wasn't alone. Two other figures followed him into the room, both men with the same lean, hungry look as their companion. "No luck with the phone, I'm afraid," the first man said, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. "Seems the storm last week knocked out the lines. They haven't been repaired yet." I stood up slowly, my heart pounding. "That's okay," I said, fighting to keep my voice level. "If you could just point me in the direction of the main road, I'll be on my way." The three men exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. Then the first man spoke again, his voice dropping to a low growl. "Now why would we do that? It's been so long since we've had a guest." I backed away, looking frantically for an escape route, but they had positioned themselves between me and the door. I was trapped. "What do you want?" I asked, hating the tremor in my voice. The man's grin widened, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp, too numerous. "Why, we want you to stay, of course, forever." They moved with inhuman speed, closing the distance between us in the blink of an eye. I lashed out blindly, my fist connecting with one man's jaw. He stumbled back, more surprised than hurt, and I used the moment of confusion to make a break for it. I dove past them, yanking the door open and plunging into the night. Behind me, I could hear shouts of anger, followed by the sound of pursuit. I ran like I'd never run before, branches whipping at my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. I had no idea where I was going, no plan beyond putting as much distance between myself and that cabin as possible. The forest was pitch black now, the trees looming like silent sentinels on all sides. More than once, I stumbled, only to scramble back to my feet and keep running. The sounds of pursuit grew fainter, but I didn't slow down. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but terror kept me moving. I ran until I couldn't run anymore, finally collapsing against a tree, gulping in great lungfuls of air. As my racing heart began to slow, I strained my ears for any sign that I was still being followed. The forest was silent, save for the pounding of blood in my ears. Had I lost them, or were they out there still, watching, waiting? I stayed there for what felt like hours, too afraid to move, too afraid to make a sound. Gradually, the adrenaline began to wear off, leaving me exhausted and shivering in the cool night air. I knew I couldn't stay here. I had to keep moving, had to find my way out of this forest before they found me again. With aching muscles protesting every movement, I pushed myself to my feet. The sky had begun to lighten, the first gray hints of dawn breaking through the canopy above. With the growing light came a surge of hope. I could do this. I could make it through this. I chose a direction at random and began walking, staying alert for any sign of being followed. As I moved, my mind raced, trying to piece together what had happened. Who were those men? What did they want with me? The questions piled up, each one more terrifying than the last. By mid-morning, I finally broke through the tree line, stumbling onto a paved road. I almost burst into tears at the sight. A kind motorist picked me up and gave me a ride to the nearest town, where I went straight to the police. They listened with doubtful expressions but agreed to send a team to investigate the cabin. When they returned, they had nothing. They said there was no cabin, no clearing, and no sign that anyone had lived in that part of the forest for decades. I've tried to push that night out of my mind, convincing myself it was nothing more than a stress-induced hallucination. But sometimes, when I close my eyes, I still see those men, still hear their voices, and still feel the terror of being hunted through the dark woods. And sometimes, when I look in the mirror, I swear I can see something in my eyes. Something dark, something hungry, something that doesn't belong. And I wonder, did I truly escape that night? Or did a part of me stay behind in that cabin, replaced by something else? Something that followed me home from those cursed woods? I don't go hiking anymore. I stay away from forests altogether. But no matter how far I run, no matter how bright the city lights are, I can't shake the feeling that somewhere out there, in the heart of the wilderness, 3 men are waiting for me to lose my way again, waiting to bring me back. The first thump from upstairs made me pause the movie. The second sent a cold shiver down my spine. I've been holding on to this story for a while, waiting for the right moment, and today I got some incredible news that makes it even more fitting. The man who stalked me for over 2 years has just been denied parole, and I couldn't be more relieved. What follows is a very shortened version of the nightmare he put me through during those years. At the time, my marriage had just ended after 4 years, and I decided to relocate to a new town to start fresh. I quickly found a job bartending at one of the many local dive bars. The regulars were a mix of all sorts, college students, bikers, and everyone in between. Within the first month, I became friends with a lovely couple who ran a horse rescue operation from their ranch. I mentioned that I had always wanted to learn how to ride, and the wife offered to teach me. We hit it off, and occasionally we'd spend girls' nights out hopping from bar to bar, chatting and flirting with guys. One particularly wild evening, she introduced me to one of her former employees. We spent the night together, and I thought that would be the end of it. I was able to move on easily, but he apparently was not. In the following weeks, I received 3 sets of roses from an anonymous admirer. What had initially seemed like a sweet gesture quickly turned unsettling when I heard from him directly. After asking if I'd received the roses, he told me that because he had spent so much money on them, I was now expected to repay him. I was stunned. At first, I had been somewhat charmed by the flowers, but his sudden sense of entitlement completely turned me off. Had he simply asked for a date, I might have considered it. But the fact that he thought he was owed anything, especially after what happened that night, was disgusting to me. I told him as much, and he responded by calling me a tease and accusing me of leading him on. Since I hadn't even seen him or spoken to him in weeks, I had no idea how he came to that conclusion. I told him to get lost and hung up. I never thought I'd hear from him again, but of course I was wrong. A week or 2 later, I was out for another girl's night when I ran into him. He was completely drunk, and he must have thought I'd forgotten about his previous remarks. I hadn't, and I confronted him about it. This only seemed to make him more aggressive. When he grabbed my backside, I quickly told a bouncer I knew, and he kicked the guy out without hesitation. I could hear him cursing me his whole way out the door. I had luckily thought ahead and asked the same bouncer to walk us to my car when we left the bar a little while later. I had been suspicious that he may have been waiting for us when we left, and it turned out to be right. As we approached my car, I saw him waiting for me. My bouncer friend knocked him around some, and this gave us enough time to get away. My friend told me later on that night why her and her husband had to fire him. Apparently, he would show up to work drunk sometimes and come on to her and give her husband an attitude. Once he'd done this the 3rd time, they had had enough and cut him loose. Now all the trouble I was having seemed to make a lot more sense. As we moved forward through the next year, I had several encounters with him around town. One particular rough instance was when he showed up at my house slobbering drunk and crying for me to take him back. I tried to explain to him that we had never been together in the first place. No one I know would think of a one-night stand as a relationship, but he must have. I had to call the cops to get him to leave, but I had no idea it would get much worse. I'd been doing my best to avoid running into him, and I know for sure it had to have been almost 2 months since I'd seen or heard from him. My new boyfriend and I had about 6 months together, and we were hanging around my place watching TV or something. We'd been out to dinner earlier that night and had only been back about an hour when a loud banging started at the front door. It only took a few bangs before it flew open, taking the frame with it. We'd both been caught off guard and were standing in the open like dummies when the culprit entered the house. It was my stalker and he was drunk, but he was also armed with a pistol. The moment he saw my boyfriend, he started shooting. My boyfriend knew it was coming and had began running when he was hit by the first shot. I'm not sure what had happened after that first shot because I started running too. By the time I made it to the bathroom and locked the door, I had counted at least 3 more shots. Since I was almost positive that my boyfriend was dead, I was going to do my best to survive. Just by chance, I had my phone in my back pocket. I was dialing 911 even before I'd locked the door. Even while I was speaking to the operator, I could hear him yelling curses at me in a slurred voice. I figured he'd started shooting through the door any second, so I laid down in the bathtub making myself as flat as possible. I can't remember exactly what she was saying to me when the shots began. I was so terrified by this point, I couldn't help but scream. The shooting seemed to go on forever before it stopped. Couldn't have been more than another 30 seconds before I finally heard the policeman yelling at him to drop his gun. Honestly, I wish he hadn't, but he must have had a small shred of sense left. It wasn't much longer until an officer knocked on the door and told me I could come out. The paramedics were already working on my boyfriend. Miraculously, he wasn't just still alive, but he was conscious and talking to them. It looked like the dumb SOB was so drunk he missed all of his vital organs, only managing to hit him twice. They'd already taken him away before I exited the bathroom, and I didn't see him again until the trial. It wasn't a long procedure. Once I testified, his lawyer stopped the trial and announced he was going to take the plea deal he was being offered. He'd had several prior offenses, so the 10 to 25-year sentence was getting off light. My boyfriend and I celebrate the good news by getting married, and we've been together for 12 years this May. Since his first parole hearing has went so well and we shouldn't have to worry about him getting out for another 2 or so years, I think we're taking an extended vacation to celebrate this time. Wish us luck for the future. The engine sputtered, coughed, and finally died, leaving me stranded in a sea of complete darkness. The headlights blinked once, twice, then went out completely, as if the night itself had swallowed them up. I sat there, clutching the steering wheel, my knuckles aching from the tension. The full weight of the situation hit me, sharp and sudden, like a punch to the gut. I was alone on a lonely stretch of country road, miles from civilization, with no cell service and a car that wouldn't start. Little did I know, things were about to take a much worse turn. I had been driving for hours, on my way back from a business trip that had gone on far too long. The GPS had recommended this back road as a shortcut, promising to save me an hour of travel. Now, as I stared into the impenetrable darkness ahead, I cursed myself for trusting that mechanical voice. For a moment, I just sat there, listening to the ticking of the cooling engine and the sound of my own labored breathing. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the occasional rustle of the wind passing through the trees lining the road. I reached for my phone, squinting at the glowing screen. No service, of course, and the battery was nearly dead. All right, I muttered to myself, trying to keep calm. Think, Mark, what now? I could stay with the car and hope someone would pass by. But it had been at least an hour since I last saw another vehicle. I could try to fix the car myself, but my mechanical knowledge was limited to changing a flat tire, and this was definitely beyond that. The only real choice was to start walking and hope I found help. With a deep breath, I grabbed my jacket from the passenger seat and stepped out of the car. The night air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine, mixed with something wilder, something unfamiliar. I shivered, pulling my jacket tighter and wishing I had packed something warmer. I shone the phone's flashlight under the hood, more out of habit than any real expectation of finding a solution. As I suspected, everything looked normal, at least to my untrained eyes. With a sigh, I closed the hood and locked the car. At least my insurance would cover a tow, if I could somehow call them. I started walking, my phone's dim beam creating a tiny circle of light around me. The road stretched on, disappearing into the darkness. On either side, dense woods pressed in, their branches reaching out like twisted fingers. Every crackle and snap made me flinch, my mind conjuring threats lurking in the shadows. I'd been walking for about 15 minutes when I heard it, a low rumble of an engine in the distance. Relief surged through me. Finally, a car. I turned, waving my arms and flashing my light, eager to flag them down. The vehicle came into view, its headlights cutting through the blackness. It was a truck, old and weathered from what I could make out. It slowed as it approached, and for a moment, I felt a surge of gratitude. But as it drew level with me, instead of stopping, it just crawled along, matching my pace. I couldn't see the driver through the glare of the headlights, but something about the situation made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding thin and uncertain in the night air. My car broke down a ways back. "Could you help me?" No response. The truck just continued to creep along beside me, its engine idling. I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. This wasn't right. Why weren't they stopping? Why weren't they saying anything? I picked up my pace and the truck matched it. My heart began to race, panic clawing at my chest. I was exposed out here, vulnerable. There was nowhere to run except into the woods, and the thought of plunging into that darkness was almost as terrifying as the silent truck beside me. "Look," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "If you can't help, that's fine. I'll just keep walking." Still no response. Just the low rumble of the engine and the crunch of gravel under tires. I walked faster, almost jogging now. The truck kept pace effortlessly. My breath came in short gasps, fear and exertion taking their toll. What did they want? Why were they toying with me like this? Suddenly, the passenger window rolled down. Hope and dread war within me as I turned, expecting to finally see the driver, to hear an explanation for this bizarre behavior. But the cab was empty. I stumbled, nearly falling in shock. How was this possible? The truck was clearly moving, keeping pace with me, but there was no one behind the wheel. My mind reeled, unable to process what I was seeing. That's when I heard it, a low, rasping chuckle coming from the empty cab. It was a sound that didn't belong to any human throat, a noise that sent icy fingers of terror down my spine. I ran. I sprinted down the road, my legs pumping furiously, driven by pure animal fear. The truck's engine roared, and I could hear it speeding up behind me. In desperation, I veered off the road, plunging into the woods. Branches whipped at my face as I crashed through the underbrush. I could hear the truck on the road, keeping pace. How was it following me through the dense forest? I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like lead. Finally, I collapsed behind a large tree, gasping for breath. I couldn't hear the truck anymore. Had I lost it? I peered around the trunk, straining my eyes in the darkness. For a long moment, there was nothing but the sound of my own labored breathing and the rustle of leaves in the wind. Then, a twig snapped nearby. I held my breath, pressing myself against the rough bark of the tree. Another snap, closer this time. Something was moving through the woods, heading straight for me. A figure emerged from the shadows, tall and oddly misshapen. As it drew nearer, I realized with horror that it wasn't a person at all, but some kind of creature. It walked on two legs, but its proportions were all wrong. Its arms were too long, nearly dragging on the ground, and its head was elongated, almost canine in appearance. It sniffed the air, and I knew with sickening certainty that it was tracking me. I had to move, had to run, but fear had frozen me in place. The creature's head swiveled in my direction, and I found myself staring into eyes that glowed with an unnatural yellowish light. A low growl rumbled from its throat, a sound that vibrated in my very bones. In that moment, survival instinct overrode my paralysis. I bolted, no longer caring about the noise I made. Behind me, I could hear the creature giving chase, its heavy footfalls and ragged breathing drawing ever closer. I burst out of the woods and back onto the road, my feet pounding against the asphalt. Ahead, I saw the faint glow of lights, my car. Somehow, in my panicked flight, I had circled right back to where I had started. I rushed to the car, tugging desperately at the door handle. It was locked. Of course, it was locked. I had locked it myself. My hands were trembling as I fumbled for my keys. Then, from the woods, it appeared. Its eyes locked onto me with a terrifying, predatory gaze. It moved toward me with an unnatural, jerky stride, closing the distance between us at a horrifying speed. Just as its clawed hand reached for me, I managed to unlock the door. I threw myself inside, slamming the door shut just as the creature's jaws snapped inches from me. It slammed into the car, rocking it violently. I could hear its claws scraping against the metal, see its grotesque face pressed against the window, saliva dripping from its fanged mouth. My hands shook as I fumbled with the ignition, praying for a miracle. The engine coughed, then roared to life. I didn't question the sudden turn of luck. Without a second thought, I shoved the car into drive and stomped on the accelerator. The tires screamed as I tore down the road, the creature's furious howl fading into the night. I drove like a maniac, taking sharp turns too quickly, glancing constantly at the rearview mirror, dreading the sight of it chasing me. It wasn't until I hit the highway, with its reassuring streetlights and the occasional passing car, that I allowed myself to relax. As the rush of adrenaline began to subside, my mind scrambled to make sense of what had happened. The truck with no driver, the creature from the woods, it all felt like a nightmare. But the scratches on my arms from the branches, the mud caked on my shoes, and the deep gouges in the car's paint told me that it had all been horrifically real. I drove through the night, not daring to stop until I was far, far away from that desolate country road. As the sun began to rise, casting soft pink and gold hues across the sky, I found myself wondering if I would ever drive at night again, or if the darkness would forever haunt me with the memory of glowing eyes and the sound of an empty truck. One thing was certain, I would never take another shortcut. Sometimes the long way is the only safe way. The GPS beeped cheerfully, announcing that we had arrived at our destination. But as I glanced out the window, a sinking feeling took over. This couldn't be right. Instead of the charming bed and breakfast we had booked for our family getaway, we found ourselves on the edge of a town that seemed frozen in time. Faded storefronts lined the desolate main street, their windows dark and unwelcoming. A wave of unease washed over me as I realized our technology had failed us, leading us to a place that felt more like a deserted ghost town than a vacation spot. "Dad, where are we?" my daughter, Sarah, asked from the back seat, her voice tinged with concern. I forced a smile, trying to mask my own growing anxiety. "Just a small detour, sweetheart. I'm sure we'll find our way soon." My wife, Lisa, gave me a skeptical glance, sensing my unease. She knew me too well to be fooled by my forced calmness. "Maybe we should turn around," she suggested quietly. "This doesn't feel right." But something, whether stubbornness or the strange pull of the deserted town, made me press on. "Let's just ask for directions," I said, pulling the car to a stop in front of what appeared to be a general store. "I'm sure someone here can point us in the right direction." As we stepped out of the car, the silence struck me like a physical blow. There were no birds, no sounds of traffic, not even the usual hum of wind. The air felt unnaturally still. The bell above the store's door jangled harshly as we entered, its noise echoing down the empty street. Inside, the store was dim and cluttered. Shelves were filled with dusty cans and boxes, untouched for what looked like decades. An elderly man stood behind the counter, his face weathered and expressionless as he watched us approach. "Can I help you folks?" he asked, his voice rough and low. I explained our situation, showing him the address of the bed and breakfast on my phone. When he glanced at the screen, Something flickered across his face. Surprise? Fear? It was gone so quickly that I couldn't be sure. Yes, he said slowly. I know the place, but you won't be able to get there tonight. The roads are washed out from the storm last week. I frowned. What storm? The weather's been clear for days. The old man's eyes narrowed slightly. Maybe where you come from, things are different. But here, it's not like that. Before I could ask him more, he continued, there's a hotel in town. Only place you'll find to stay tonight. Just 2 blocks down, you can't miss it. His tone unsettled me, but what other choice did we have? It was late, and the kids were exhausted from the long drive. We thanked the old man and left the store, the weight of the strange town pressing down on us as we made our way to the hotel. The bell's discordant jangle following us out. The hotel was indeed impossible to miss. It was a looming Victorian structure, its paint peeling and windows dark. As we approached, I could have sworn I saw a curtain twitch in one of the upper windows, but when I looked again, all was still. The lobby was musty and dimly lit, decorated with faded floral wallpaper and antique furniture that had seen better days. A thin, pale woman stood behind the desk, her fingers tapping an irregular rhythm on the worn wood. We need a room for the night, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The woman's lips curved into what might have been a smile. Of course, we've been expecting you. A chill ran down my spine. Expecting us. But we just decided to stop here. She waved her hand dismissively. Oh, always expecting visitors in a town like this. Not many come through. But when they do, she trailed off, her eyes gleaming in the low light. We were given a key, an actual metal key, not a key card, and directed to our room on the 3rd floor. The elevator was out of order, so we trudged up the creaking stairs, our footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. Our room was large but oppressive, with heavy drapes and dark wood furniture. The kids huddled together on one of the beds, their earlier excitement replaced by quiet apprehension. It's just for one night, Lisa said, trying to sound reassuring. But I could see the worry in her eyes. As we settled in for the night, strange noises kept us on edge. Footsteps in the hallway that never seemed to pass our door. Whispers that sounded just on the edge of comprehension. And once, a long, low moan that seemed to come from the very walls themselves. None of us slept well that night. The next morning, we were eager to leave. But as we stepped out of the hotel, we were met with a sight that stopped us in our tracks. The town was different. The empty storefronts now bustled with activity. People in oddly old-fashioned clothing hurried along the sidewalks. A horse-drawn carriage clattered down the street. What's going on? Sarah asked, her eyes wide. Is this some kind of festival? I shook my head, unable to form words. This wasn't just a festival. Somehow, overnight we had stepped into a different time. We made our way back to the general store, hoping to find answers. The old man was there, looking exactly the same as he had the day before. What's happening? I demanded. What is this place? He regarded us calmly, as if our panic was an everyday occurrence. This is Millhaven, he said simply, and you're home now. Home? Lisa echoed, her voice rising. This isn't our home. We need to leave. The old man's expression hardened. Ain't nobody leaves Millhaven. Not really. You might think you've gone, but you'll always find your way back. The town calls to its own. A crowd had begun to gather outside the store. Their faces were friendly, welcoming even. But there was something off about their smiles, something hungry. We ran back to our car, which thankfully still started. As we peeled out of town, I could see the people of Millhaven in the rear-view mirror. They didn't chase us. They just stood there, watching as if they knew something we didn't. For hours, we drove in silence. The events of the past day, too strange to process. It wasn't until we crossed the state line that we began to relax, to believe that we had truly escaped. But our relief was short-lived. As night fell and fatigue set in, I realized we needed to stop. Up ahead, I saw lights. A small town. We'll stop here for the night, I said, pulling off the highway. As we drove down the main street, a sense of déjà vu washed over me. The storefronts seemed oddly familiar. The hotel loomed ahead, its Victorian silhouette unmistakable against the fading light. This couldn't be possible. We'd been driving for hours and we were in a different state, but there it was, undeniable. We were back in Millhaven. The old man's words reverberated in my mind. Nobody leaves Millhaven. Not really. As we sat in the car, staring at the town that had somehow pulled us back, I realized the truth of what he'd said. We were home now, and home, it seemed, would never let us go. In the days and weeks that followed, we tried to leave over and over. But no matter which way we went, no matter how far we drove, we always ended up back in Millhaven. It was as if the town existed in its own loop, a pocket of reality that twisted the very rules of time and space. We learned to adapt, to live in this place that was both beautiful and terrifying. The people here welcomed us as if we were always meant to be part of their world, teaching us their ways and revealing the magic hidden beneath the everyday. Sarah and Tommy became cherished members of the community, delighting in the freedom to explore a town where time held no sway. Lisa found her place in the town's library, cataloging books filled with knowledge from all eras. As for me, I took over the general store when the old man decided it was his time to leave, whatever that meant in a place like this. I became the gatekeeper, the one who welcomed new arrivals, seeing the same fear and confusion in their eyes that I once had. Sometimes, late at night, I dream of the world we left behind. I wonder if time still moves there, if anyone has noticed our absence. But when I wake, I hear the sound of horses' hooves clattering on cobblestone streets, see the gas lamps flickering in the endless twilight, and I remember, this is home now, Millhaven, the town that calls to its own, the place where lost souls find their way. And as I open the store every morning, ready to greet whatever travelers might wander into our little pocket of unreality, I can't help but smile. After all, everyone finds their way to Millhaven eventually. It's just a matter of time. This story is completely real. Let me tell you a little about myself. I live with my mom, dad, younger brother, and our dog in a very remote area in Germany. I was about 13 years old when this happened. We don't have any close neighbors, and it was a particularly cold Saturday in December. I remember the day clearly because my mom only worked on Saturdays and my brother, dad, and I spent the afternoon watching movies together. It was close to 5 p.m. when things started happening. Since it was winter, it was almost dark outside. The room was lit only by the TV and the glow from our fireplace. At one point, my brother looked out the window because it had started to snow heavily. We all gathered by the window to watch, and suddenly, our dog began growling. He ran up and down the room, looking extremely alert. This behavior was very unusual for him. My dad stood up and looked outside but didn't see anything. After a few minutes, the dog started to calm down again. So we went back to watching our movie and everything seemed normal for a while. Then it happened again. I noticed that my brother was staring out the window by the back door. I asked him what he saw, and he just shook his head. That's when we saw her, an elderly woman walking toward our back door. We were completely baffled because in such a rural area, it's rare for anyone to come by, let alone an elderly lady. She looked to be in her 80s or 90s, wearing a typical grandma apron and a headscarf. Keep in mind, it was well below freezing outside. She tapped on the glass of the back door and started smiling at us in the strangest way. Meanwhile, our dog was hiding under the table, whimpering and growling. My brother moved closer to me, and my dad walked to the back door, opening it slightly. In a confused tone, my dad asked what she was doing in our backyard. She smiled, but instead of responding, she looked past him directly at us. She didn't even glance at my dad. She took a step forward, trying to push her foot inside the door. My dad immediately pushed her foot back and slammed the door shut. She glared at him, then at us, and started laughing in a chilling, maniacal way. Then, as if nothing had happened, she calmly walked away. We all sat there, frozen in confusion, not knowing what to say. My brother and I quickly looked out the window behind us, but she was gone. There's only one small path leading in and out of our backyard, right next to the house. From the window, we would have seen her walk past, but she never did. My dad stepped outside and looked around, but she was nowhere to be found. There were no footprints in the snow either. It couldn't have been that the tracks were covered, because only a few minutes had passed between her leaving and my dad going outside. To this day, we still have no idea what happened. I'm not sure if this was something paranormal or not. It may not seem as creepy to you, but to us as kids, it was the most terrifying thing we've ever witnessed. This might sound strange to some people, but I collect movies on VHS. My collection has grown to over 1,000 tapes, and it's expanding every day. I spend my weekends hunting through thrift shops and browsing online sellers for interesting and hard-to-find cassettes. Sometimes, I'll purchase entire boxes or lots of tapes. These boxes often contain home recordings, forgotten television shows, family memories that were deemed unimportant, and a lot of blank tapes. There was a time when I loved nothing more than to curl up and watch these with my girlfriend. While most of the tapes turned out to be dull or unremarkable, every once in a while, I'd stumble upon something truly unique. A couple of years ago, while browsing Craigslist, I found a listing for a box of tapes. They were just taking up space, and the seller wanted them gone, free to the first person who showed up. I jumped on the opportunity. An hour later, I was sitting in front of my TV with a big box of tapes. The box contained 44 tapes. Many were blank, and some were home recordings with no labels. Oh well, I love a good mystery. With a few hours before work, I decided to watch a tape or two on Fast Forward. The first one had an episode of the original Battlestar Galactica, and the second one was blank. Afterward, I shoved the box into my closet and left for work, forgetting about it for the next 9 months. In the meantime, I kept buying more tapes. My collection quickly took over the spare bedroom. I built a huge shelf to store it all and cataloged each tape as I added them. That's when I remembered the box in the closet. Realizing I hadn't finished watching all the tapes, I set aside an evening with my girlfriend, Brittany, to go through them. I remember that night vividly. Brittany arrived around 7 p.m. We made dinner together and had Butterfinger ice cream for dessert. By 9, we were cuddled up, ready to watch the first tape. Over the next few hours, we watched a recording of NBC Primetime from 1987, 3 HBO movies, and a wedding video from 1991. Brittany especially enjoyed that one. The fourth tape was another wedding video. I watched as much as I could before deciding to take a break for a bathroom stop and a smoke. When I stepped away, Brittany was completely engrossed in the ceremony. After I finished, I went outside for a quick cigarette, which took no more than 5 minutes. Before returning to the bedroom, I grabbed a refill of water. As I was doing this, I heard Brittany scream my name. I rushed into the room, my heart racing. She had her hands over her mouth, her eyes wide with shock, and she was staring at the TV screen. What? I asked, concerned. I leaned over to look at the screen, but all I saw was a blue screen. What's going on? She stayed silent but pressed rewind on the VCR. A few seconds later, she hit play and patted the spot next to her on the couch. I assumed she wanted me to sit down, so I did. The tape resumed with the happy couple preparing to cut the cake. I was starting to get annoyed and asked again, "What's going on?" "Wait a second. It's coming," she said, her voice urgent. The word startled me, and I jumped a little. I sat back and watched, waiting for whatever it was she had seen. The couple began feeding each other cake, and then, without warning, the recording cut out. Static blared at us for a moment before a new recording began. Now a man was staring at us. He looked to be staring at a video camera. When he moved away from the camera, you could see a nude woman laying on a bed. The guy hopped on the bed, and they began doing things. "All right, baby," I said in a joking way. Brittany snapped and told me to shut up. By this point, I was completely dumbfounded. I almost felt embarrassed watching it. The couple continued coupling, and the woman whispered, "Choke me." He did. And I'm thinking, okay, this is kind of kinky to myself. Not my thing, but to each their own. The man continues to choke the woman. She began gasping for air, but he didn't stop. Even when she grabbed his arms, he kept going. He completed the act and let go of her throat. The couple laid quietly together for a few moments and said nothing. Suddenly, the man turns towards the woman. He stares for a few seconds, then abruptly starts shaking her. The dude is yelling her name and occasionally slapping her cheeks, which she's not moving. This is when I started to catch on. The man then stands up, now holding his partner by the shoulders and shaking her. Still no movement. This is when he started to catch on. He eventually stops and just stares into her empty eyes. I'm beginning to freak out now. No way. Brittany is silent. The man sat down on the edge of the bed, his head buried in his hands. A low sobbing could be heard. This goes on for a few moments before he remembers the camera. In one long motion, he reaches out and slams his hand down on it. The blaring of the static returned, and I sat struck dumb. The hissing continued until Brittany finally pressed stop. Dude, it was the only word I could get out. I had never seen anything like that in my life. Brittany turned towards me and asked what we should do. I honestly had no idea. I still couldn't believe it was real. Maybe it wasn't. Let me have a smoke and I'll consider our options. I retreated outside to think. When I returned, I proposed the idea that it may have been fake. I don't want to go to the cops until I'm sure it's real. No way do I want to become the butt of some troll's joke. Okay, if she had any misgivings, she kept them to herself. She may have still been in shock. I know I was. Our evening was clearly over. I suggested she stay the night, but she declined. No big deal. I'd have a hard time getting any sleep until I knew the truth. My first goal was to contact the tape's previous owner. I knew for sure the man in the tape wasn't the guy I had gotten the box from. There was a good chance he may know his identity though. My emails went unanswered. I tried to contact him by phone, but his number no longer worked. I finally went by his place and discovered he had moved. Without a way to contact him, I had run out of options. It was time to go to the police. They told me they'd review the video and reach out if they had any further questions. At that point, it was out of my hands. During the weeks of my search, I barely saw Brittany. She always had some excuse to avoid me, and I figured it was only a matter of time before she ended things completely. Another week passed, and then she called. "I can't do this anymore. I haven't slept for weeks," she said, her voice shaky. "All I see is that woman." There was no point in arguing with her. I wished her well and hung up the phone. It would have been heartless to expect her to let it go, especially after everything we had been through. I too had my fair share of bad dreams over the past month. "If your feelings change in the future, I'm not hard to find," I said, but I didn't expect her to call back. Since then, hundreds of cassettes have passed through my hands. As space became limited, I started selling blank tapes and extra copies of films. With Brittany no longer in the picture, I admit that curling up in bed to watch tapes no longer holds the same appeal. Most of my viewing now takes place in the living room. But to this day, every time I pop an unlabeled tape into the player, I get a tinge of fear. I've had a lot of time to reflect, and I've come to realize that when you collect things that capture a moment in time, a sliver of someone's life, you never truly know what dark secrets you might uncover. This happened when I was 14 and my friend David was 15. We were used to having sleepovers all the time, and that night was no different. David's parents were out, so we cranked up the volume, playing video games and blaring music while eating way too much junk food. I'll skip over most of the details to keep the story brief. We played and listened to music until about 4 a.m., when we started to wind down. David suggested we take a walk around the neighborhood to help us relax, and I agreed. We were back in about 10 minutes. David's basement has a strange setup, so let me try to explain. His house sits on a bit of a hill, so half of the basement is above ground, which is where we had been hanging out, and the other half has a TV and couches where we were going to sleep. David put on a movie and gave me a blanket. I settled into the couch nearest the basement stairs, and he took the one on the other side, farther from the stairs. I didn't last long before I drifted off. Not long after, I was jolted awake. David was crouched next to me, shaking my shoulder. He whispered for me to be quiet and listen upstairs. Couldn't have been more than an hour since we fell asleep, and the movie was still playing, though now muted. Still half asleep, I struggled to focus on what he was talking about. It sounded like someone was rifling through a drawer, followed by 2 pressure cracks from the floorboards upstairs. "I think someone's up there," David whispered. That was enough to wake me up completely, and I sat up. I thought it might just be his cats running around upstairs, and that David was overreacting. But what happened next is the most terrifying thing I've ever experienced. 2 coughs from upstairs sent a rush of adrenaline through both of us. Footsteps began moving toward the basement stairs. David looked absolutely terrified. I jumped off the couch, scrambling for my phone on the floor. David rushed to the TV to turn it off, and we silently made a break for the den door. We passed the basement stairs, but I didn't dare look. David flung open the old door, and we sprinted across the street, hiding in the neighbor's bushes. David called the police while I watched the windows of his house. Even in the dark, the faint moonlight was enough for me to see a tall silhouette moving through the large living room window. David told the dispatcher, and they confirmed that police were on the way. It felt like we were waiting forever until the wail of sirens cut through the night. 2 squad cars sped down the cul-de-sac and stopped in front of David's house. We rushed over to the officers and told them everything. 2 officers went inside to search the house. 1 searched the yard and surrounding areas, and the 4th stayed with us, asking the usual questions. Had we seen the person? How did we know someone was inside? Did we know if anything was taken? We didn't know much, just that someone was definitely inside. After about 5 minutes, we heard an officer shout, followed by the sound of footsteps running into the woods behind David's yard. The officer with us rushed to the open gate at the back of the yard. The intruder was trying to escape into the woods, but was caught when the officer shined his flashlight in the area. The man was cuffed and arrested. When they walked him back to the squad car, we saw just how massive he was, about 6 feet 7 inches and weighing around 300 pounds. The officers searched every part of the house and confirmed that no one else was inside. Strangely, the man hadn't stolen anything. To this day, I wonder what his intentions were. Needless to say, we didn't get any sleep that night. We were too scared, jumping at every noise, checking the house over and over to make sure no one else had broken in. That's the story of the time someone broke into my friend David's house while I was sleeping over. It's the most terrifying experience I've ever had.